I surprised my husband and his parents with a luxury Maldives vacation. On the way to the airport he casually said, "We're taking my new girlfriend instead. She needs a break from her dead-end job." His mother smirked as they left me standing there. Little did they know, I'd secretly rebooked their dream getaway to a landfill retreat in Siberia. The look on their faces when they landed. Priceless. "We're taking my new girlfriend instead. She needs a break from her dead-end job." The words hung in the air of our SUV like poison gas. I stared at Connor, my husband of 8 years, certain I'd misheard him. The airport loomed ahead, its departure sign glowing in the morning light. A beacon of the escape I'd spent months planning. A vacation that no longer included me. "You can't be serious," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. But the look on his face said everything. That half-smirk I once found charming now twisted into something cruel and unfamiliar. Delilah, my mother-in-law, adjusted her designer sunglasses in the passenger seat. "Cassidy dear, surely you saw this coming? Connor needs someone who matches his ambitions." That smirk. That damn self-satisfied smirk as they pulled away, leaving me standing on the curb with my carefully packed suitcase. The same suitcase that contained the surprise itinerary for our Maldives getaway. The one I'd been planning for 18 months. What they didn't know was that I'd already changed those plans. I used to measure my days by how many times Delilah would purse her lips at my efforts. Thanksgiving dinner? The turkey was a touch dry, dear. Christmas decorations? A bit tacky for the neighborhood, don't you think? My promotion at work? Well, it's not exactly corporate leadership, but it's nice you're trying. If you've ever reached your breaking point with someone who took you for granted, hit subscribe. It's free and you'll join a community that understands sometimes the perfect revenge is reclaiming your power. Now let's see how Cassidy turned her heartbreak into liberation. For 8 years, I'd twisted myself into impossible shapes trying to fit the mold of Connor's perfect wife. I learned to make his mother's signature meatloaf even though I was vegetarian. I highlighted my naturally dark hair to achieve what Delilah called a more polished blonde, because Connor mentioned once, just once, that he liked blondes. "You've got such potential, Cassidy," Delilah would say, rearranging my living room furniture while I was at work. "Connor just needs a partner who can keep up with his trajectory." The trajectory. Always the trajectory. Connor's father had been some mid-level executive who died when Connor was in college, but Delilah spoke about him like he'd been the CEO. Everything was about appearances and climbing higher. I'd been saving for the Maldives trip since our 5th anniversary. Every extra shift at the marketing agency, every freelance project, every tax return, all squirreled away in an account Connor knew nothing about. Not because I was hiding it, but because money only interested him when it came from his family. "The overwater bungalows have glass floors," I'd whispered to myself late at night, scrolling through resort photos while Connor worked late. "You can see tropical fish swimming right beneath you." I'd imagined his face lighting up with surprise. The trip representing everything we'd lost: adventure, intimacy, wonder. The travel agent had warned me about the cost. "This is our premium package," she'd explained, eyeing my modest outfit with barely concealed skepticism. I'd pushed my credit card across her desk with quiet determination. "It's an investment in our marriage," I'd told her, refusing to acknowledge the flutter of anxiety about the debt I was accruing. 3 years to pay off minimum. Worth it to see genuine appreciation in Connor's eyes again. There had been signs, of course. The late nights that smelled like unfamiliar perfume. The sudden password on his phone. The way he stopped reaching for me in bed. "He's just stressed about the promotion," I told my sister during our monthly phone call. "Once he makes partner, things will calm down." "Cass," she'd said, her voice gentle but firm. "You've been saying that for 3 years now." I'd hung up annoyed. She didn't understand the pressure Connor was under. The expectations from his mother. From the partners at his law firm. From himself. Or maybe I was the one who didn't understand that I'd become background noise in my own marriage. 2 months before the trip, I found a long blonde hair on his jacket. Not mine. My highlights had grown out. Another beauty maintenance ritual I'd let slide as our bank account dwindled from my secret vacation fund. Working with the new paralegal on the Jefferson case. He'd explained without looking up from his laptop. "She's ambitious. Reminds me of myself, actually." I'd nodded and swallowed the question burning in my throat. Instead, I'd gone back to researching snorkeling excursions and couples massages. The special dinner I'd arranged on a private beach under the stars. The photographer I'd hired to capture what I hoped would be Connor's genuine smile. Something I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The morning of our departure, I woke at 5 a.m. too excited to sleep. I prepared Connor's favorite breakfast, eggs Benedict with smoked salmon and fresh dill, and set the table with the expensive dinnerware Delilah had given us for our wedding. For special occasions, she'd emphasized, as if I might use them for ordinary Tuesday dinners. I wore the blue sundress Connor had once said brought out my eyes, years ago on our honeymoon. My hair was freshly colored, my nails done in a subtle French manicure. Perfect wife, perfect surprise, perfect opportunity to recapture what we'd lost. The doorbell rang as I was arranging strawberries into a heart shape atop Belgian waffles. Connor's favorite childhood breakfast, according to Delilah. Coming, I called, smoothing my dress and checking my reflection in the hallway mirror. This was it, the moment everything would change. I opened the door to find Delilah, wrapped in a camel hair coat despite the June heat, her Louis Vuitton luggage stacked neatly beside her. Cassidy, she said, air kissing my cheek. Connor said you'd be ready by now. The car service is waiting. I blinked in confusion. Car service? I thought we were driving to the airport. Delilah sighed, the familiar sound of disappointment I'd grown to dread. Connor arranged everything. He didn't tell you? Typical. Men never communicate the details. She brushed past me into the house. Is that breakfast? We don't have time. The flight's at 10. Flight? But our flight isn't until... I stopped, stomach dropping. Our flight. The tickets in my name and Connor's. The confirmation emails only I had seen. Connor appeared at the top of the stairs, wheeling his suitcase. Morning, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. You ready? Mom's driver is outside. That's when I noticed. His suitcase wasn't the one I'd helped him pack the night before. Where's the blue Samsonite? I asked, voice suddenly hollow. Connor shrugged. This one's bigger. More suitable for a long trip. A long trip. The exact length of the Maldives vacation I'd planned. 2 weeks of paradise I'd been imagining for 18 months. Let's go, Delilah said, checking her watch. We're meeting her at the terminal. Her. Not it. Her. And still I followed them out to the waiting town car, my own hastily grabbed suitcase rolling behind me like a faithful pet. Still believing there must be some explanation, some misunderstanding. It wasn't until we were halfway to O'Hare that Connor finally said those words, casual, dismissive, final, that shattered the facade I'd spent 8 years perfecting. We're taking my new girlfriend instead. She needs a break from her dead-end job. I felt the air leave my lungs as though I'd been punched. Time seemed to slow, the traffic outside the window blurring as my mind struggled to process his words. You're what? I finally managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Connor glanced at me in the rearview mirror, annoyed as if I were a child interrupting an important business call. Tessa. My girlfriend. You've met her at the firm holiday party. Blonde legs for days. She was working the coat check. The coat check girl. I remembered her, impossibly tall, with a laugh that carried across the crowded ballroom. I'd complimented her earrings, even tipped her generously. All while she was sleeping with my husband. Connor, I don't understand. I planned this trip for us. The Maldives. The Maldives. Delilah's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up as she turned to face me. Oh, Cassidy. How quaint. We're going to St. Bart's. Connor's firm has connections with a private resort there. Much more appropriate for someone of Connor's position. Appropriate. That word again. The measuring stick I never quite reached. When? I whispered, my hands clenching around the leather seat. When did this start? Connor sighed dramatically, checking his watch. Does it matter? Look, it wasn't planned. These things happen. People grow apart. Grow apart? Connor, I've been planning this trip for over a year. I maxed out my credit card. I took on extra projects. And that's exactly the problem, he interrupted, turning onto the airport access road. Always hustling for those little marketing projects. No vision, Cass. Meanwhile, Tessa is already interviewing at top law schools. She understands ambition. Delilah nodded approvingly. She comes from good stock. Her father plays golf with the governor. I felt something hot and dangerous building in my chest. So you've been cheating on me. For how long? The whole time I've been saving for this surprise. Connor had the audacity to look offended. It's not cheating when a relationship has run its course. You and I both know this marriage hasn't been working. I was just waiting for the right time. The right time. My voice cracked. And that would be after I spent thousands on a vacation I can't get refunded? Don't be dramatic, Delilah cut in. Connor will handle any financial loose ends. He always does. She checked her reflection in the visor mirror, adding, though maybe if you'd focused more on your career like I suggested instead of playing housewife, you wouldn't be so concerned about money. The casual cruelty took my breath away. 8 years of trying to please this woman and she could dismiss me so easily. There she is, Connor said suddenly, his voice softening as he pointed toward the terminal entrance. I followed his gaze and saw her, Tessa, standing under the departure sign. Tall, blonde, perfect, dressed in a white linen outfit that screamed, tropical getaway, more effectively than a billboard. She waved, her smile bright enough to light up the entire drop-off lane. Connor pulled over, and the car had barely stopped before Delilah was out the door, embracing Tessa like a long-lost daughter. Darling, you look absolutely resort-ready. I heard her coo, the same woman who'd criticized my choice of swimwear just last summer as trying too hard for someone your age. I sat frozen in the back seat, watching this tableau unfold as though I were watching a movie about someone else's life. Connor popped the trunk and started unloading the luggage, his and his mother's, not mine. Finally, he came around to my door and opened it. For one absurd moment I thought he might apologize, might say this was all an elaborate, cruel joke. Instead he leaned in and spoke quietly. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce papers. You can stay in the house until the lease is up next month. He straightened, adding almost as an afterthought, you should probably cancel whatever budget vacation you booked. The refund might cover next month's rent. I stepped out of the car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Around us, families embraced, couples checked tickets. Life continued in its normal rhythms while mine collapsed. Connor, I said, the word catching in my throat. You can't just. Oh, he absolutely can, Delilah interrupted, suddenly beside me. And frankly, you're making a scene. Dignity, Cassidy. At least try to maintain that. She patted my arm with cold fingers. You'll find someone more suitable. Someone who doesn't expect so much. I watched as Connor walked over to Tessa, sliding his arm around her waist with casual intimacy. She giggled, that same musical laugh from the holiday party, and kissed his cheek. He never once looked back at me. The driver placed my suitcase on the curb beside me and returned to the car. Delilah gave me one last pitying glance. The car will take you home. We've already paid. Her final act of charity. As they walked away, laughing, luggage rolling smoothly behind them, I stood paralyzed. Travelers streamed around me like water around a rock, some giving me curious glances, others too focused on their own journeys to notice the woman having her life shattered on the sidewalk outside Terminal 3. I don't know how long I stood there watching the automatic doors where they'd disappeared. Long enough for the morning sun to move higher, casting shorter shadows. Long enough for the tears to dry on my cheeks without me realizing I'd been crying. Then I noticed the folded paper that had fallen out of my purse. The itinerary for the Maldives. The one with both our names on it. The one I'd modified just yesterday with a single phone call, after finding a text from T on Connor's phone asking what time their flight left. Something shifted inside me then. A tectonic plate moving beneath the landscape of my soul. The hurt was still there, a gaping wound that might never fully heal. But rising from somewhere deeper came something unexpected. Not just anger. Clarity. For the first time in 8 years I saw Connor and Delilah exactly as they were. Not as the people I desperately wanted to please, but as the shallow, cruel people who had never deserved my efforts in the first place. I picked up my suitcase. Not to follow the driver back to an empty house that was never really mine. But to walk into the terminal, pull out my phone and check the status of Flight 2463 to Dixon, Siberia, where 3 first-class passengers would soon discover their luxury vacation had taken an unexpected turn. Enough was enough. And I was just getting started. Few people knew about my professional background before I became Connor's wife. Before I reduced myself to fit his expectations, I'd spent 5 years as a project manager for an international event planning company that specialized in corporate retreats and incentive trips. My specialty? Crisis management and last-minute itinerary changes for VIP clients. The irony wasn't lost on me as I settled into a coffee shop in the terminal, laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. Connor and Delilah had always dismissed my career as party planning. Little did they know I'd once rerouted an entire corporate board from the Bahamas to Alaska in under 12 hours when a hurricane threatened. "Good morning, Veronica," I said, putting on my most professional voice when the travel agent answered. "This is Cassidy Mitchell from Pinnacle Experiences. I need to implement Plan B for the Stuart Mitchell party." "Of course, Ms. Mitchell. Let me pull up their file." The agent's voice was crisp and efficient. "Ah yes, the contingency arrangements we discussed yesterday. You're absolutely certain?" "Completely certain," I replied, feeling a calmness I hadn't experienced in years. "The clients have specifically requested the authentic wilderness experience we discussed. They've signed all the necessary waivers." Which was technically true. Connor had signed the revised itinerary last week without reading it, just as he signed everything I put in front of him. His signature was on documents authorizing changes to their luxury St. Bart's vacation, though the destination change would certainly come as a surprise. "Very good. I've confirmed their accommodations at the Dixon Wilderness Retreat. It's quite remote as you requested." Remote was an understatement. Dixon sat on the edge of the Kara Sea in northern Siberia, one of the most isolated human settlements in the world. The eco-retreat I'd booked them into was actually a former Soviet research station that had been half-heartedly converted into tourist accommodations, situated conveniently downwind from the region's largest industrial landfill. Perfect. And their special requests? "All arranged," Veronica confirmed. "No cell service, limited internet access, as per their digital detox requirements. The wilderness guides speak minimal English, and the rustic accommodations have been paid in full, non-refundable." I smiled. "And the special welcome package?" "The local delicacies and traditional attire will be waiting in their rooms. I must say, it's unusual for clients to request such an authentic experience." The local delicacies consisted of fermented fish and whatever passed for haute cuisine in the Arctic Circle. The traditional attire was essentially hazmat suits for their tour of the nearby landfill, a highlight of their stay. "My clients are adventurous souls," I replied sweetly. "They specifically requested something off the beaten path. Something memorable." After finalizing the details, I opened my personal email and crafted a message to myself from the St. Bart's Resort, confirming the unfortunate overbooking situation and the complimentary upgrade to an exclusive wilderness experience. I'd forward it to Connor once they landed, along with the terms and conditions he'd signed, agreeing that all changes were non-refundable and non-transferable. Everything was perfectly legal. Their flight to St. Bart's would mysteriously reroute due to mechanical issues, landing instead in Moscow where a connecting flight to Dixon would await. By the time they realized what had happened, it would be too late. I glanced at my watch. Their flight would depart in 40 minutes. Just enough time to handle one more critical task. I navigated to our joint bank accounts and systematically transferred my portion of our savings, money Connor had always referred to as our emergency fund, but had never contributed to, into a new account under my name only. It wasn't theft. It was reclamation. Next came the apartment search. Not in our expensive neighborhood where Delilah's friends might spot me, but a modest studio across town. Something temporary, a base from which to rebuild. As I confirmed the apartment application, a text arrived from Connor. "Boarding now. Talk to lawyer tomorrow about divorce details. Keys under mat when you leave." No apology. No acknowledgement of 8 years together. Just practical details, as if our marriage had been nothing more than a business arrangement. I texted back, "Have a wonderful trip. I hope it's everything you deserve." The double meaning brought a genuine smile to my face. Another task required handling: their social media presence. Connor and Delilah were obsessed with appearances, constantly documenting their perfect lives for their followers. They'd expect to post enviable vacation photos from St. Bart's. Instead, they'd have no choice but to go dark, their carefully curated online personas disrupted by their sudden digital detox in the Arctic. I purchased a tracking service that would notify me when their phones came back online, allowing me to follow their journey remotely. 12 hours from now, they'd be landing in Moscow, confused but not yet panicked. 24 hours from now, they'd be reaching their final destination, where the reality of their situation would become horrifyingly clear. For the first time since I'd met Connor, I felt powerful. Not the false power that came from being associated with his name or Delilah's social circle, but something genuine. Something earned. I closed my laptop and looked around the busy terminal. Ordinary people going about their lives, unaware of the quiet revenge being orchestrated in their midst. No dramatic confrontations. No screaming or throwing things. Just the precise, methodical dismantling of expectations. As I left the airport, I caught my reflection in a window. I looked different somehow. Taller perhaps. Or maybe just unburdened. I'd spent so long trying to make myself smaller to fit Connor's world that I'd forgotten my own strength. Back at the house, I maintained the facade. Anyone watching would see a woman calmly packing her belongings, occasionally taking business calls, making arrangements for movers. Nothing to suggest the satisfaction warming my chest every time I imagined Connor's face when he realized where he was actually going. I'd booked the most expensive package at the retreat. The one with the special wilderness excursion that included camping overnight near the landfill to experience true Arctic survival conditions. Delilah would be especially thrilled with the communal bathrooms and the traditional Russian breakfast of congealed porridge served daily at 5 a.m. sharp. Tessa, with her white linen outfit and designer luggage, would find the accommodations particularly challenging. According to their itinerary, their luggage would be delayed for the first 48 hours of their stay, forcing them to wear the provided clothing, heavy wool garments reminiscent of Soviet-era factory workers. As evening fell, I made one final call to confirm their transfer from Moscow to Dixon. The coordinator assured me everything was arranged, including the scenic 12-hour layover in a remote terminal with no restaurants or shops. Revenge, I was discovering, wasn't about explosive confrontation. It was art. Precision. The careful application of consequences to actions. Connor, Delilah, and Tessa had chosen to humiliate me. Now they would experience the results of that choice in exquisite detail. I slept soundly that night for the first time in years, dreaming not of reconciliation or even vindication but of freedom. The freedom that comes from finally seeing the truth and having the courage to act on it. Tomorrow I would begin rebuilding my life. Tonight I would enjoy knowing that sometimes, justice wears the face of an Arctic wilderness guide named Dmitri, waiting patiently to introduce 3 entitled Americans to the realities of Siberian hospitality. As I sorted through my belongings the next morning, deciding what to take and what to leave behind, memories surfaced like debris after a flood. With my newfound clarity, I could finally see the patterns that had been there all along. Our third date. Connor had ordered for me without asking what I wanted. "Trust me," he'd said with that charming smile. "I know what you'll like." I'd been flattered then, mistaking control for care. When the dish arrived, something with cilantro which I despised, I ate every bite, ignoring my watering eyes. "See? I knew you'd love it," he'd said, and I'd nodded, already learning to doubt my own preferences. The night he proposed, he'd presented the ring with theatrical flourish at a restaurant filled with his colleagues. "I didn't want anything too flashy," he'd explained later when I privately admitted the large diamond wasn't my style. "But people in my position have certain expectations." I'd nodded, understanding that my taste was secondary to his image. I pulled open my bedside drawer and found the small box of mementos I'd kept hidden from Connor's minimalist aesthetic. A dried flower from a bouquet I'd bought myself. A postcard from my sister in Colorado that Connor had dismissed as pedestrian scenery. A small sketchbook of designs I'd dreamed of pursuing before Connor convinced me that marketing offered more stability. My fingers touched something cold and metallic. My grandmother's silver bracelet. I'd stopped wearing it after Delilah's cutting comment at our first Christmas together. "How provincial," she'd said, examining it while the family opened gifts in their coordinated cashmere sweaters. Connor's grandmother had quite the jewelry collection. Tiffany Cartier. "Perhaps one day he'll let you wear some of her pieces instead." She'd looked pointedly at my wrist. Something more befitting a Stuart woman. The memory triggered another. Last Thanksgiving, when Delilah had hosted 20 of their closest friends. I'd spent days helping with preparations, only to discover my place card was at the children's table in the kitchen. "Oh, didn't Connor tell you? We needed your seat for Senator Abernathy's daughter." She just got back from Paris and is considering law school. She and Connor have so much to discuss. The daughter's name had been Tessa. I sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Tessa hadn't been some random coat check girl. She'd been strategically placed in our lives for months, perhaps longer. The holiday party, the Thanksgiving dinner, probably dozens of other accidental meetings I'd never witnessed. And that Paris trip hadn't been real. Tessa had been working coat check just weeks before Thanksgiving, hardly the jet-setting lifestyle of a senator's daughter. The elaborate backstory had been crafted to make her seem more suitable, more aligned with their aspirations. A bitterly funny detail emerged from my memory. Connor hated cilantro too. I'd discovered it months into our marriage when he'd pushed aside a garnish with disgust. "Can't stand the stuff," he'd commented casually. When I'd reminded him of our third date, his response had been dismissive. "You must be confused. I never ordered that." But I wasn't confused. I'd simply accepted his version of reality over my own, the first of countless rewrites to my personal history. Like our wedding. I'd wanted something intimate, perhaps at the lakeside where we'd first kissed. Connor had insisted on his mother's country club with 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. "This is how it's done in my family," he'd said, making it clear that his traditions would now be mine. When I'd walked down the aisle, Delilah had stopped the procession to adjust my veil, whispering, "Chin up, dear. You're marrying above your station. Try to look worthy of it." Even my job had been systematically diminished. When we'd first met, I'd been managing international events with budgets in the millions. After we married, Connor had suggested a position at a friend's local agency. "To reduce your stress," he'd explained. "Besides, my career is demanding enough for both of us." I'd believed him when he said it was best for our marriage, for our future family. The family that never materialized because Connor always had a reason to wait. Another promotion, a better house, the right time. In reality, children had never been part of his plan for us. They would have divided my attention, given me an identity beyond being his wife. The phone interrupted my thoughts. A notification from the tracking app. Their plane had landed in New York for a connecting flight. Soon they'd be over the Atlantic, still blissfully unaware of their actual destination. As I closed the notification, I saw an old text thread with my former colleague, Miguel. He'd reached out 6 months ago about an opportunity with his new company. "We're expanding internationally and need someone with your expertise," he'd written. "The travel would be extensive, but the compensation is excellent." I declined without even discussing it with Connor, knowing he'd disapprove of the travel requirements. Now I wondered if Miguel's offer still stood. I continued packing, finding more evidence of the gradual erosion of my identity. Photos where I stood at the edges, half cropped out of family gatherings. Clothes I'd never liked but worn because Connor or Delilah had selected them. Books with turned-down pages. Self-help titles about being a supportive partner, about sublimating one's needs for the good of a relationship. In our home office, I found a folder of dinner party seating arrangements in Delilah's handwriting. Looking through them, I noticed a pattern. For the past year, Connor had been consistently seated away from me and next to various young, accomplished women. Tessa's name appeared with increasing frequency over the last 6 months, always placed beside Connor, often with notations like law school discussion or tennis connection. I wasn't just being replaced. I had been systematically phased out, a carefully orchestrated transition so gradual I hadn't recognized it happening. The final piece clicked when I found a brochure for a couples therapy retreat, dated from 3 years ago. I remembered suggesting it during a rough patch. Connor had refused, calling it new age nonsense. Yet here was the brochure with his handwriting in the margins. "Last resort if she won't accept the changing dynamics." Even then he'd been planning his exit, preparing arguments for why our marriage had naturally evolved into something that no longer included me. Not because he'd fallen for someone else, but because I had somehow failed to evolve with him. The truth settled over me with surprising lightness. I hadn't failed our marriage. It had been designed to fail from the beginning. A temporary arrangement until someone more aligned with Connor and Delilah's ambitions came along. I slipped my grandmother's bracelet onto my wrist, its familiar weight an anchor to who I'd been before, and who I might become again. Then I reached for my phone and typed a message to Miguel. "Is that international position still available? I find myself unexpectedly free to travel." As I hit send, A notification appeared on my tracking app. Their flight path had changed. The first phase of my plan was in motion. I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes for the first time in years. Let Connor, Delilah, and Tessa enjoy their strategic alliance in the frozen wasteland I'd arranged for them. I had my own course correction to navigate. Miguel's response came within the hour. Position is yours if you want it. When can you start? I answered without hesitation. 2 weeks. I have some personal matters to wrap up first. Those personal matters included watching justice unfold in real time. I'd set up a command center of sorts in my new studio apartment. Laptop, phone, and a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. According to the flight tracker, Connor, Delilah, and Tessa had just landed in Moscow. Their connecting flight to Dixon wouldn't leave for 12 hours. Giving them plenty of time to stew in a terminal with spotty Wi-Fi and no luxury amenities. I imagined Delilah's increasing agitation, Connor's clenched jaw, Tessa's dawning realization that dating a married man might have unforeseen complications. Right on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Connor. Flight diverted to Moscow. Mechanical issues. Airline says we're being rerouted. What the hell is Dixon? Can't get through to travel agent. I smiled and typed back. How unfortunate. I've forwarded all the documentation to your email. The terms and conditions you signed are quite clear about rerouting protocols. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, this is ridiculous. Fix it. I'm afraid I can't. As you mentioned, we're getting divorced. Your travel arrangements are no longer my concern. Enjoy Siberia. I hear it's lovely this time of year. I muted his number and turned to the task of rebuilding my life. First step. Reactivating my professional network. I spent the morning updating my resume, reaching out to former colleagues, and setting up meetings with potential clients for my freelance work before joining Miguel's company. Around noon, a notification from Instagram caught my attention. Tessa had posted a story, a blurry shot of the Moscow terminal with a crying emoji. Her caption read, "Vacation nightmare. Stuck in Russia?" At Connor Stewart better have a plan. I clicked on Connor's profile. Nothing yet. He was probably too busy trying to salvage their trip, calling in favors from connections who couldn't help with the paperwork nightmare I'd arranged. Even his law firm's influence wouldn't easily overcome the specific travel authorizations required for their new destination. By evening, they should be boarding their connecting flight to Dixon. The true realization of their predicament wouldn't hit until they landed in the remote outpost, where the luxury accommodations they expected would be replaced by the stark reality I'd arranged. I spent the afternoon purging my closet of clothes I'd bought to please Connor and Delilah. Designer pieces in muted colors that had never felt like me. At the bottom of a drawer, I found a small sketchbook filled with clothing designs I'd abandoned years ago when Connor had called them impractical hobby drawings. The sketches were actually good. Better than I remembered. One design in particular, a structured jacket with unexpected details, caught my eye. On impulse, I photographed it and sent it to my sister with the message, "What do you think? Too impractical." Her response was immediate, "It's gorgeous. When did you start designing again? I want one in every color." Something warm unfurled in my chest. Not vindication, but something quieter and more profound. Possibility. That evening, I received notification that Connor, Delilah, and Tessa had boarded their final flight. Within hours, they would arrive in Dixon, where a driver would take them to the eco-retreat I'd arranged. I imagined their faces as they first glimpsed the converted research station, the realization dawning that there were no infinity pools or beachside cabanas awaiting them. While I waited for the inevitable fallout, I cooked myself a proper meal. Something with cilantro which I discovered I actually loved once I stopped pretending otherwise. I ate at my small kitchen table, savoring each bite, allowing myself to enjoy the simple pleasure of food prepared to my own taste. Around midnight, my tracking app showed their phones coming back online briefly, just long enough for a flurry of activity before disappearing again. The digital detox portion of their stay had begun. Before the connection dropped, Tessa managed to post once more. A dimly lit photo of what looked like a military barracks, with 3 narrow cots and concrete walls. Her caption, "Is this a joke? At Connor Stewart, your surprise sucks." Delilah had left a voicemail, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Cassidy, this childish prank has gone too far. Connor's father had connections in the State Department, and I assure you there will be consequences. I deleted the message without responding. Empty threats from a woman whose power over me had evaporated. The next morning, I woke to an email from Miguel with details about my new position. The company was expanding into Asian markets, and they needed someone to manage corporate events across multiple countries. The salary was double what I'd been making at the local agency. As I reviewed the offer letter, a text came through from an unknown Russian number. Connor must have found some way to communicate despite the limited connectivity. You won't get away with this. We're stuck in a frozen wasteland eating food I wouldn't feed to animals. My mother is beside herself. Tessa hasn't stopped crying. This isn't funny, Cassidy. I considered ignoring it, but something compelled me to respond one last time. It wasn't meant to be funny. Actions have consequences. Enjoy the authentic wilderness experience you signed up for. I've moved on. And I had. The righteous anger that had fueled my revenge was fading, replaced by a strange lightness. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about their suffering, but about reclaiming my power. They were no longer central characters in my story, just footnotes in a chapter one was closing. Over the next week, I threw myself into preparations for my new life. I signed the lease on my apartment, accepted Miguel's offer, and even went on a date with an architect I'd met at a coffee shop. Not because I was ready for a relationship, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to be seen as myself, not as someone's accessory. Occasionally I'd check the tracking app. Their phones would appear online briefly, presumably during the few hours each day when the retreat allowed limited connectivity. Each time I felt less invested in their discomfort, more focused on my own path forward. On what would have been the 10th day of their vacation, I received an email from Connor's lawyer about divorce proceedings. I forwarded it to my own attorney, a sharp-witted woman my sister had recommended, and went back to packing for my first international assignment. That evening I sat on my new balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I'd once thought too bold for my wardrobe. My grandmother's bracelet caught the fading light as I raised a glass in a silent toast. Not to revenge but to liberation. To the woman who had been buried beneath years of subtle manipulation and had emerged stronger. To boundaries that would never again be crossed without consequences. To a life that was unmistakably, unapologetically mine. Somewhere in Siberia, Connor, Delilah, and Tessa were counting the days until their return to civilization. They would eventually make it back, perhaps a little humbled, certainly furious. But I would already be gone, 30,000 feet above the earth, heading toward a future they had no part in shaping. And for the first time in 8 years that future looked limitless. If Cassidy's journey from betrayal to liberation resonated with you, hit subscribe to join our community. Remember, the most powerful revenge isn't about hurting others. It's about reclaiming your worth and building a future that's truly yours. Thanks for reading, and I'll see you in the next story. My husband is on a luxury vacation while I'm at our daughter's funeral. He texted, "I'll call you later, important meeting." But he doesn't know what I've already done. The day of my daughter Grace's funeral was painted in muted grays. The clouds hung low as if the sky itself mourned her loss. I stood at the edge of her grave, the weight of my sorrow pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. My little girl, my sweet Grace, was gone, and with her, a piece of my soul had been buried too. Friends and family murmured condolences, their voices barely penetrating the haze of my grief. But I noticed one thing above all, the empty space beside me. Marcus wasn't there. Hey beautiful people. Your support means everything to me. Help me reach my next big milestone by hitting that subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss an amazing video. Let's dive in. When the last shovelful of earth was laid, I couldn't feel anything but numbness. The service was over, but my nightmare wasn't. As I walked to the car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. For a moment, I thought it might be Marcus, finally reaching out to explain why he wasn't at his own daughter's funeral. Instead, it was a text message. Important meeting. I'll call you later. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. The audacity of those words made my blood boil. But it wasn't just the message. It was the small detail beneath it. The location tag. The text hadn't come from a conference room or an office building. It had come from a luxury beach resort. My vision blurred, not with tears this time, but with pure, unadulterated rage. Marcus wasn't in a meeting. He wasn't mourning. He was relaxing in paradise while I stood at our daughter's grave. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone tightly as memories flooded back. The weeks leading up to Grace's death, the arguments, the cold distance that had crept into our marriage. He had grown increasingly distant, his excuses piling up like bricks in a wall between us. Business trips, late-night meetings, vague mentions of stress. I had been too focused on Grace and her illness to question him, but now everything fell into place. Marcus's absence wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Even in her final days when Grace needed him most, he had found reasons not to be there. I remembered the nights I stayed by her bedside, holding her fragile hand as she fought for every breath. I had begged Marcus to come home early from one of his supposed trips, to be with her, to be with us. He had promised, but he never showed up. I shook my head trying to push those memories aside, but they clung to me like a shadow. My grief was still fresh, raw and bleeding, but something new was stirring within me. Beneath the pain was a spark of anger, growing hotter with every passing second. How dare he abandon us like this? How dare he lie to me, to our family, while our daughter's memory was barely cold? Sitting in the car, I stared at his message again. "I'll call you later." The casual tone, the lack of urgency. It was as if Grace's death was just another inconvenience in his carefully curated life. He didn't care. He didn't care about me, about Grace, or about the family we had built together. And that was when the spark of anger turned into something much darker. As the car rolled away from the cemetery, I clenched my fists and forced myself to focus. My tears had dried, and in their place was a cold determination. If Marcus thought he could walk away from this unscathed, he was wrong. If he thought he could betray us and still live his perfect little life, he was delusional. He had taken so much from me already, but I wasn't going to let him take anything else. Not without consequences. The drive home felt endless, but it gave me time to think, to plan. I replayed every moment of the past year in my mind, searching for clues, for cracks in Marcus's facade. The late-night phone calls, the sudden expenses, the constant excuses. He had been building this web of lies for months, maybe even years, and I had been too distracted by Grace's illness to see it. But now, with the clarity that only rage can bring, I saw everything. When I arrived home, the emptiness of the house hit me like a punch to the chest. Grace's room was just as she had left it, her toys neatly arranged, her favorite blanket folded at the foot of her bed. I couldn't bring myself to go inside, so I closed the door and leaned against it, tears threatening to fall again. But I couldn't let them. Not now. I needed to stay focused. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands still trembling. As I sipped, I opened my laptop and began searching. Social media profiles, email accounts, bank statements. Anything that could confirm what I already knew in my gut. It didn't take long to find the proof. Marcus had been withdrawing large sums of money from our joint account, all while claiming to be cutting back on expenses for Grace's medical bills. There were receipts for five-star hotels, expensive dinners, and spa treatments, all charged to a credit card I didn't even know he had. And then there were the photos. My heart clenched as I scrolled through his social media, finding carefully curated images of him with a younger woman. Lily. That was her name. She was tagged in nearly every photo, her face glowing with happiness as they lounged by the pool or shared cocktails on the beach. In one image, Marcus was kissing her on the cheek, a wide grin on his face. My stomach churned. I slammed the laptop shut, my breathing heavy. It was worse than I had imagined. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was living an entirely separate life, one where Grace and I didn't exist. My grief turned into a burning fury. Marcus had not only betrayed me, but he had also betrayed Grace. He had chosen his own selfish desires over his family, over his daughter, over everything that should have mattered. I stared at my reflection in the window, my face pale and drawn, but my eyes sharp with determination. Marcus thought he had won, that he had escaped the responsibilities of our life together. He thought he could leave me to grieve alone while he basked in the sun with his mistress. But he was wrong. He had underestimated me. As I stood there, a plan began to form in my mind. I didn't just want him to suffer. I wanted to dismantle his entire world. Piece by piece, I would take everything he cared about, just as he had taken everything from me. And when I was finished, he would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. That night, I sat down at the table with a notebook and pen, writing out every detail of my plan. Marcus's lies, his infidelity, his embezzlement. I would expose it all. He thought he was safe, untouchable, but he had no idea what was coming. I cried for my daughter, yes. But now I was going to make Marcus cry for everything he had taken from me. I stared at the notebook in front of me, the plan taking shape with every stroke of my pen. Marcus had built his life on lies, but those lies would be his undoing. Every betrayal, every selfish decision, every dollar stolen from our family, it was all fuel for the fire I was about to ignite. He thought he had escaped unscathed, but his reckoning was coming. The first step was simple: gather evidence. I couldn't confront him without proof, not just for my own satisfaction but to ensure there was no way he could wriggle out of the consequences. I opened my laptop again, this time with a clear focus. The financial records I had found earlier were just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus had been careful to hide his tracks, but not careful enough. I started with our joint account. Over the past year, there had been multiple withdrawals labeled as business expenses. Each transaction was sizable, often leaving me scrambling to cover Grace's medical bills. I had believed him when he said the money was tied up in investments or that it was being used for her treatments. Now I knew better. Cross-referencing the withdrawals with receipts I found in his emails, I realized most of the money had been spent on luxury hotels, fine dining, and high-end boutiques. It wasn't hard to guess who had been enjoying those luxuries with him. But the money wasn't the only thing he'd stolen. He had taken time, precious moments that Grace and I could never get back. As I scrolled through his emails, I found excuses he had sent to colleagues, canceling meetings to extend his trips. Meanwhile, I had been sitting by Grace's bedside, holding her hand and telling her everything would be okay. I clenched my fists, my anger boiling over again. Till I needed more. Marcus was slippery, and I knew he would try to deny everything unless I had undeniable proof. That was when I decided to bring in someone who could help me dig deeper. A private investigator. I had never done anything like this before, but desperation and determination made me bold. I found a local investigator online, a woman named Eleanor, who had glowing reviews for her discretion and thoroughness. When I called her, I kept my voice steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. "I need help uncovering my husband's secrets," I said, my words clipped and direct. Eleanor didn't ask unnecessary questions. She simply assured me she would find what I needed and set up a meeting. The next morning I met Eleanor in a quiet cafe. She was sharp-eyed and professional, with a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. As I laid out what I already knew, his affair, the financial discrepancies, his absence at Grace's funeral, her expression remained neutral, but I could tell she understood the gravity of the situation. "I'll dig into his financials, track his movements, and see if there's anything else he's hiding," Eleanor said, jotting notes in a small leather notebook. "It might take a few days, but I'll get you what you need." "Thank you," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "I want to make sure he pays for everything he's done." Over the next few days, Eleanor kept me updated on her progress. Each phone call brought a new revelation, each one more damning than the last. Marcus wasn't just spending our money on vacations and gifts for Lily. He had been embezzling from his own company. According to Eleanor's findings, he had been siphoning funds from his business accounts, covering his tracks with false invoices and fake vendors. It was a house of cards waiting to collapse, and I intended to be the one to push it over. But it wasn't just the financial betrayal that cut deep. Eleanor also uncovered emails between Marcus and Lily, discussing their plans to move abroad together. He had been setting the stage to leave me entirely, abandoning the life we had built and starting fresh with her. One email in particular made my blood run cold. In it, Marcus had written, "Once everything is finalized, we'll never have to look back. She'll never see it coming." He meant me. I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at the email printout in my hands. The audacity, the cruelty, it was almost too much to comprehend. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me. He had plotted to erase me from his life entirely. But if he thought I would sit back and let him win, he was sorely mistaken. With Eleanor's findings in hand, I began the next phase of my plan, building the trap. I needed to make Marcus believe he was in control, that his lies were still working. I couldn't confront him yet, not until the timing was perfect. So I sent him a carefully worded text. "I've been thinking about us. I know we've been distant, but I want to talk. Can we meet at the vacation home next weekend? I think we need some time to reconnect." I stared at the screen, waiting for his reply. It didn't take long. "Of course. "I'll be there," he wrote, his tone casual as if nothing had happened. The irony wasn't lost on me. He thought he was manipulating me, stringing me along while he pursued his selfish desires. But the truth was I was the one pulling the strings now. In the days leading up to our meeting, I worked tirelessly to ensure everything was in place. I gathered every piece of evidence Eleanor had uncovered, bank statements, emails, photos, and organized them into a folder. I also contacted an attorney, someone who could advise me on my legal options once I confronted Marcus. But I wasn't just thinking about legal consequences. I wanted Marcus to feel the weight of his actions, to understand the pain he had caused. That was why I prepared something extra, a video montage of Grace. Her laughter, her smiles, the moments we had shared as a family before everything fell apart. I wanted him to see what he had thrown away. The night before our meeting, I sat alone in the living room, staring at a photo of Grace on the mantel. Her bright eyes and mischievous smile seemed to mock me, reminding me of everything I had lost. But as the tears threatened to spill again, I straightened my back and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. For Grace. For me. Marcus had taken so much from us, but now it was my turn to take something from him. And when I was finished, he would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The drive to the vacation home felt surreal, like walking into the mouth of a storm I had meticulously crafted. The ocean stretched endlessly to my right, its rhythmic waves a stark contrast to the tempest brewing inside me. When I arrived, the house felt different. Too quiet, too perfect, as though it was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. I parked the car, stepped out, and inhaled deeply. This place had once been a sanctuary for our family, a retreat filled with Grace's laughter and the warmth of togetherness. Now it felt like a stage for retribution, a battleground where the truth would finally destroy the facade Marcus had built. Inside, I moved with purpose. The folder of evidence Eleanor had compiled was heavy in my hands, not just in weight but in meaning. I opened it on the dining table, spreading out the incriminating documents like pieces of a puzzle. Bank statements, emails, and photos of Marcus with Lily. Each one was a dagger aimed at the heart of his lies. I had also brought something personal, something that would pierce deeper than any financial or legal evidence. It was a video montage of Grace. I connected my laptop to the television and queued it up, pausing on the first frame, Grace beaming at the camera, her eyes full of life. Marcus would see it and he would feel the depth of what he had lost. Not just his daughter but his soul. When everything was in place, I sat down at the kitchen island and poured myself a glass of water. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the glass, the enormity of what I was about to do settling over me like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about exposing Marcus. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my voice. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. He was here. Marcus entered the house as if he owned the world, his smile practiced and confident. He carried a small overnight bag and wore a casual linen shirt, the epitome of a man on a carefree vacation. "Hey," he said, his voice warm as though we were still the happy couple we used to be. I forced a smile, masking the storm inside me. "Hey," I replied, my tone steady. "Thanks for coming. I thought we needed some time to talk." He set his bag down and walked over to me, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I turned my face slightly, letting his kiss land awkwardly near my temple. It was subtle, but he noticed. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by his usual charm. "You're right," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "We've been through a lot. I'm glad you reached out." I nodded, folding my hands on the table to keep them from shaking. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said, keeping my voice calm. "About us, about Grace, about everything that's happened." Marcus nodded solemnly, as though he had any right to share in my grief. "I know it's been hard," he said, his tone dripping with practiced empathy. "But we'll get through this together. I promise." His words were a cruel joke, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached for the first piece of evidence. A bank statement showing a series of withdrawals he had labeled as business expenses. I slid it across the table toward him, my movements deliberate. Marcus glanced at the document, his brow furrowing. "What's this?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Just something I found while going through our accounts," I said, tilting my head as though I were genuinely curious. "I noticed some discrepancies. Maybe you can explain them to me." He picked up the statement, his eyes scanning the numbers. For a brief moment his confident facade faltered. "These are just work expenses," he said, his voice tight. "You know how it is. Travel, meetings, client dinners. It adds up." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "Client dinners at five-star resorts? Meetings that cost thousands of dollars? Marcus, do you really expect me to believe that?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I reached for another document. A receipt for a luxury suite at a beach resort, dated the same week Grace had been hospitalized. I placed it on the table, the weight of the truth crashing down between us. "Let me guess," I said, my voice icy. "Another client dinner?" Marcus's jaw tightened, his eyes darting toward the door as though he were already plotting his escape. "I don't know what you're trying to imply," he said, his tone defensive. "But you're clearly upset, and I think we should talk about this later." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the silence of the house. "Later? Like when you're on your next business trip?" "No, Marcus. We're talking about this now." I stood, pushing my chair back with enough force to make it screech against the floor. Walking to the living room, I grabbed the remote and turned on the television. The screen lit up with Grace's smiling face, frozen in the first frame of the video I had prepared. Marcus froze, his eyes fixed on the screen. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I pressed play. The video began to roll, showing clips of Grace laughing, playing, and blowing out candles on her birthday cake. Her voice filled the room, bright and full of joy, a stark contrast to the heavy tension between us. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I turned to Marcus, my voice trembling with rage. "This is what you missed while you were off with her. This is what you threw away for your selfish desires." He didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of the video of Grace's absence was too much for even him to deflect. But I wasn't finished. I picked up the final piece of evidence, a printed email from Lily, detailing their plans to move abroad together. I slammed it onto the table in front of him. "Were you even going to say goodbye?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Or were you just going to disappear, leaving me to pick up the pieces while you played house with her?" Marcus's face turned pale, his confidence evaporating like smoke. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "You took everything from me, Marcus. My daughter. My trust. My life. And now you're going to pay for it." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Grace's laughter still playing on the screen. Marcus looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt, anger, and panic. He had no idea what was coming next. The air between us felt heavy, a suffocating mixture of tension and unspoken truths. Marcus sat frozen, his face pale as the weight of the evidence I'd laid before him sank in. The laughter of our daughter still echoed softly from the television, a cruel reminder of everything he had turned his back on. I crossed my arms, my gaze unwavering as I stared him down. "Say something," I demanded, my voice low and sharp. "You always have something to say, Marcus. So explain this to me. Explain how you justified abandoning your daughter while she was dying." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I didn't abandon her," he said finally, his voice trembling. I was working. I was trying to provide for us." "Provide for us?" I shot back, my tone laced with venom. "Is that what you call draining our accounts to fund your vacations and your mistress? Is that what you call leaving me alone to watch Grace die while you were too busy lounging on a beach?" His hands clenched into fists on the table, but he didn't meet my eyes. "I didn't know it would get this bad," he muttered. "I didn't know she would die." I finished for him, my voice breaking on the word. "You didn't know because you weren't there, Marcus. You didn't care enough to know." The words hung in the air like a knife between us. For a moment he looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped and he let out a long, shaky breath. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't there when I should have been. But you don't understand, I needed an escape. I couldn't handle watching her suffer." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You needed an escape? Do you think I didn't? Do you think I didn't cry myself to sleep every night, praying for a miracle while you were off living your fantasy life? You didn't need an escape, Marcus. You needed an excuse." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I stepped closer, grabbing the folder of evidence and pulling out a photo of him and Lily, smiling arm in arm on a yacht. I held it up in front of him, my hands trembling with anger. Was she worth it? I demanded. Was she worth losing your daughter, your family, your soul? He flinched as though I had struck him, his eyes flicking to the photo and then away. It wasn't like that, he said, his voice desperate. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I needed someone who wasn't drowning in grief all the time. The words hit me like a slap to the face. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. Grief. I repeated, my voice shaking. You think I wanted to be drowning in grief? You think I chose this? You're the one who left, Marcus. You're the one who abandoned us. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, slamming the folder onto the table. Save it, I snapped. I don't care about your excuses. Because while you were busy playing house with her, I was busy making sure you'll never get away with it. His eyes widened, the first glimmer of real fear flashing across his face. What do you mean? He asked, his voice unsteady. I smiled coldly, reaching into my bag and pulling out a stack of documents. These, I said, dropping them onto the table in front of him, are copies of every fraudulent transaction you made. Every dollar you embezzled from your company. Every cent you stole from us. His hands trembled as he picked up the documents, his eyes scanning the pages. How did you get this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Does it matter? I replied, my tone icy. What matters is that the authorities have them too. I reported you, Marcus. They're probably already building a case. His face went pale, his breathing quickening. You can't do that, he stammered. Do you know what will happen to me? I'll lose everything. You mean like I lost everything? I shot back, my voice rising. Like Grace lost everything because you were too selfish to be there for her? Yes, Marcus. I know exactly what will happen. And I don't care. He stood abruptly, pacing the room as he ran his hands through his hair. You don't understand, he said, his voice frantic. If this gets out, I'll go to prison. My reputation will be ruined. Good, I said simply, crossing my arms. You deserve it. He turned to face me, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. You're just doing this to hurt me, he accused. You're not thinking about the consequences. I stepped closer, my eyes blazing with fury. The consequences? I repeated. You think I'm not thinking about the consequences? Marcus, I have thought about nothing else. Every sleepless night, every tear I've shed, every moment I've spent planning this, I've thought about the consequences. And I'm ready to face them. Are you? He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find a response. For the first time he looked truly defeated, the weight of his actions crashing down on him like a tidal wave. But I wasn't finished. I turned back to the television, pausing the video of Grace on her birthday. Look at her, I said, my voice trembling. Look at what you missed. Look at what you threw away. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto the screen. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment I thought I saw tears welling in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I shook my head, my heart heavy with anger and grief. It's too late for sorry, Marcus. Sorry doesn't bring Grace back. Sorry doesn't undo the damage you've done. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the television. Marcus sank into a chair, his head in his hands while I stood over him, my arms crossed. You thought you could betray me, betray us and walk away unscathed, I said, my voice steady. But now you know the truth. You can't. And you won't. As the weight of my words settled over him, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of myself, a piece of my strength. Marcus had taken so much from me, but he couldn't take this. He couldn't take my power, my voice, my determination. I turned off the television, the room plunging into silence. We're done here, I said, my voice firm. You can leave. But don't think for a second that this is over. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt, fear and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. But I didn't care. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about me. And I was just getting started. Marcus didn't leave immediately. He sat slumped in the chair, staring at the folder of evidence as though willing it to disappear. His once confident demeanor had dissolved into a pitiful display of defeat and denial. I stood by the window, my arms crossed, watching the waves crash against the shore in the distance. For so long Marcus had controlled the narrative of our lives. Now that control was mine. You should go, I said, breaking the heavy silence. My voice was cold, unyielding. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow. Please, let's talk about this, he pleaded. We can fix this, fix us. I turned to face him, my expression unflinching. There is no us, Marcus. There hasn't been for a long time. And now there's no fixing this either. He stood, gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice trembling. Ruin me? Destroy my life? I tilted my head, a humorless smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I'm not ruining your life, Marcus. You did that all on your own. I'm just making sure everyone else sees it. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop him. Don't, I said. Just leave. With that, I turned away, my resolve unwavering. I didn't watch as he gathered his things and left. The sound of the door closing behind him was enough. I stood in the quiet aftermath, letting the tension seep out of my body. The first battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The next morning I got to work. Marcus had underestimated me for years, treating me like a passive participant in our marriage, someone too blinded by love or duty to challenge him. But he had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to my limits. The first step was ensuring his professional downfall. I drafted an anonymous email to the board of directors at his company, attaching copies of the financial documents Eleanor had uncovered. The email was concise and damning, detailing his embezzlement and fraudulent activities. I didn't just send it to the board, I sent it to key stakeholders, investors, and even the company's legal team. There would be no way for Marcus to wiggle out of this one. As I hit send, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. Marcus had built his career on lies, and now those lies would unravel in spectacular fashion. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the end of the day, news of Marcus's financial misconduct had spread like wildfire within his company. Eleanor, ever thorough, kept me updated on the chaos unfolding behind closed doors. They're conducting an internal investigation, she told me over the phone. It's only a matter of time before they bring in law enforcement. Good, I replied, my tone steady. Let them. Meanwhile, I made sure Marcus's personal life wasn't spared from scrutiny. I shared the photos of him and Lily with a carefully curated list of mutual acquaintances, friends, family, colleagues. The reactions were immediate and visceral. Messages flooded my phone, most of them expressing shock and outrage. People who had once admired Marcus now saw him for what he truly was. A selfish, deceitful man who had betrayed not only his wife but also his daughter's memory. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about ensuring he could never hurt anyone the way he had hurt me. 2 days later, I received the call I had been waiting for. A stern voice on the other end of the line introduced himself as Detective Reynolds, part of the task force investigating financial crimes in our city. He explained that they had received credible evidence of Marcus's embezzlement and were moving forward with an official investigation. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, he said. We'll be in touch if we need further information. I hung up, my hands trembling, not with fear but with a sense of vindication. For months I had felt powerless, trapped in a web of grief and betrayal. Now I was the one holding the threads and Marcus was the one caught in the trap. The day Marcus was arrested was both surreal and strangely satisfying. I watched from the window as 2 plainclothes officers approached him outside his office. He tried to maintain his composure, but the sight of him being handcuffed and led into a squad car was a moment I would never forget. My phone buzzed incessantly after the news broke. Friends and acquaintances shared articles and social media posts, their messages a mix of disbelief and morbid fascination. Marcus's name was plastered across headlines. Prominent executive arrested for embezzlement. Businessman's double life exposed in shocking scandal. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Instead, I sat in my living room sipping tea and scrolling through the coverage. The photos accompanying the articles were unflattering. Marcus being led away in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn. It was poetic justice. A week later, Marcus called me from jail. I stared at the phone as it rang, his name flashing on the screen. For a moment, I considered answering just to hear the desperation in his voice. But then I remembered Grace's laughter, the nights I had spent alone in the hospital, the cold emptiness of her funeral. I let the call go to voicemail. He called again the next day and the day after that. Each time I ignored him. I didn't need to hear his excuses or his pleas. I had given him enough chances, enough forgiveness. Now it was his turn to face the consequences. The media storm continued to rage, and I watched it all unfold from the safety of my home. Reporters camped outside Marcus's former office, eager for statements from his colleagues. Tabloids speculated about his relationship with Lily, painting her as a gold-digging accomplice. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control over my life. Marcus had tried to take everything from me, but he had underestimated my strength, my resilience. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. As the weeks passed, I began to rebuild. I sold the vacation home, the place that had once been a symbol of our family but had become tainted by Marcus's betrayal. I donated the proceeds to a charity supporting children with terminal illnesses, a tribute to Grace's memory. Every decision I made, every step I took was a reminder that I was more than the pain Marcus had caused me. I was a mother, a survivor, a woman who had reclaimed her power. And Marcus? He was just a man who had lost everything. The silence in my house was different now. It wasn't the suffocating stillness that had haunted me after Grace's death or the heavy quiet that Marcus's betrayal had left behind. This silence was lighter, almost peaceful, as though the house itself was finally able to breathe again. Marcus was gone, his life in ruins, and I had made sure he could no longer manipulate or hurt anyone. The headlines about his trial had begun to fade, replaced by fresher scandals and fleeting news cycles. But for me, the echoes of his downfall remained, lingering like the scent of rain after a storm. I sat on the couch, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. The warmth should have been comforting, but a strange hollowness lingered in my chest. I had done what I needed to do, what I knew was right. Marcus deserved every consequence, every ounce of the public humiliation and legal retribution he faced. And yet I couldn't ignore the faint ache that whispered in the back of my mind. It wasn't regret. No, I didn't regret exposing him, dismantling the empire of lies he'd built on the foundation of our broken family. It was something else. A quiet realization that revenge, as necessary as it had been, couldn't mend everything. It couldn't bring Grace back or erase the scars Marcus had left on my heart. Justice had been served, but justice wasn't the same as healing. I let out a deep breath, running my fingers along the edge of the coffee table. A framed photo of Grace sat there, her smile radiant as ever. I picked it up, tracing the curve of her cheek with my thumb. "I hope I made you proud," I whispered, my voice barely audible. In that moment I made a decision. It was time to move forward, not just for me but for Grace. She had been my light, my reason for fighting through every storm. I couldn't let her memory be tied to the pain Marcus had caused. I needed to create something beautiful from the ashes of our past. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. I started by packing up the family home, boxing up memories that carried both joy and sorrow. It wasn't an easy process. Every room held fragments of a life that no longer existed. The laughter that had once filled the living room, the faint scent of Grace's favorite lavender shampoo in the bathroom, the small handprints she had left on the windows. But as painful as it was, it also felt liberating. Each box I sealed was a step closer to reclaiming my life, to shedding the weight of a house that had become more of a prison than a sanctuary. I reached out to a realtor listing the house for sale. When the for sale sign went up on the front lawn, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for what I was leaving behind, but also hope for what lay ahead. Moving to a smaller, quieter apartment brought its own challenges, but it also offered a fresh start. The space was modest but warm, with sunlight streaming through the windows and a cozy nook by the bay window where I could sit with a cup of tea and read. It felt like mine, free from Marcus's shadow, free from the ghosts of our past. I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't spoken to in months, even years. Grief and betrayal had isolated me, but now I found solace in their company. We shared dinners, laughter, and stories that reminded me of the world beyond my pain. Slowly, I began to rediscover the pieces of myself that had been buried under the weight of loss. I also threw myself into new pursuits, things I had always wanted to do but never had the chance. I enrolled in a photography class, learning how to capture the beauty of fleeting moments. I volunteered at a local children's hospital, reading stories to kids and seeing their faces light up with wonder. These small victories felt like the first steps toward healing, like planting seeds in a garden that had long been barren. One afternoon, as I sat by the bay window with Grace's photo in my hands, an idea began to take shape. I wanted to honor her memory in a way that would bring light to others, just as she had brought light to my life. That's when the Grace Foundation was born. I started small, reaching out to community leaders and organizations for support. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide resources and support for families with children facing terminal illnesses. It was a cause close to my heart, one that allowed me to channel my grief into something meaningful. The first event we organized was a charity walk, and I was overwhelmed by the response. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers came together, their footsteps echoing a shared purpose. As I stood at the starting line looking out at the sea of faces, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Grace's memory was alive in every step they took, in every dollar raised to help families in need. The foundation gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It reminded me that love could endure, even in the face of unimaginable loss. Grace's spirit lived on, not just in my heart but in the lives of the families we helped. Despite the progress I had made, there were still moments when the past crept up on me uninvited. Late at night, when the world was quiet and the shadows grew long, I would find myself thinking of Marcus. Not with longing or regret, but with a lingering sense of curiosity. Did he feel remorse for what he had done? Did he ever think of Grace, of the life he had so carelessly thrown away? I would never know, and perhaps that was for the best. Marcus's chapter in my life was closed, sealed shut by the choices he had made. My story was mine to write now, and I wasn't going to let his mistakes define it. One evening, as I sat on the couch flipping through an old photo album, I came across a picture of Grace and me at the beach. She was building a sandcastle, her face scrunched up in concentration, while I knelt beside her, laughing. I smiled, a bittersweet ache blooming in my chest. The memories no longer felt like daggers. They felt like gifts, reminders of the love we had shared. "I miss you every day," I whispered, my voice soft. "But I'm going to be okay. I promise." And for the first time in a long time I believed it. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and slowly life began to take on a new rhythm. The pain didn't disappear. It never truly would. But it became a part of me, a quiet reminder of where I had been and how far I had come. The Grace Foundation continued to grow, touching more lives than I ever could have imagined. Every success, every family we helped, felt like a small victory for Grace's legacy. As I stood on the stage at our second annual fundraiser, looking out at the crowd of supporters, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Marcus's name was a distant memory, his presence erased from the life I had rebuilt. This was my story now, a story of resilience, of love, of finding light in the darkest of places. And as I spoke into the microphone, my voice steady and strong, I knew that Grace was with me, her light guiding me forward. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, an unassuming piece of paper that carried the weight of everything I thought I had left behind. My name was scrawled across the front in Marcus's familiar handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. It had arrived earlier that day, forwarded from the old address. For hours I had ignored it, leaving it unopened while I went about my day. But now, as the house settled into its nightly stillness, I found myself staring at it, unable to look away. I didn't want to read it. Whatever Marcus had to say, it wouldn't undo the pain he'd caused or the choices he'd made. But something about the letter felt different, heavier. It wasn't just an attempt to justify himself. I could feel that even before breaking the seal. Finally, with trembling fingers, I picked it up and tore it open. The paper inside was creased, the words written in a hurried, uneven hand. I took a deep breath and began to read. "Dear, I don't know if you'll read this. Part of me hopes you don't, because I don't deserve to have my words heard by you. But if you are reading this, I need you to know. I'm sorry. For everything. I've spent every day in here thinking about Grace, about you, about what I did to both of you. There are no excuses for my actions, no words that can erase the pain I caused. I know that now. But there's something I've been carrying for so long, something I need to tell you, even if it doesn't change anything. The night Grace died, I was on a plane. You probably remember. One of my so-called business trips. But what you don't know is that I wasn't just running away from my responsibilities. I was running from the truth. Before I left, I'd had a conversation with her doctor. He told me Grace's condition was worsening, that her chances of survival were slim. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the thought of losing her, of watching her suffer, of failing her as a father. So I ran. I boarded that plane and left you to face it all alone. But there's something else. I found out weeks later, after it was too late, that there had been an experimental treatment available. It wasn't a guarantee, but it could have been a chance. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to have false hope. But now I realize the truth. I didn't tell you because I was afraid. Afraid of hope. Afraid of losing her even after trying everything. I failed Grace. I failed you. And I will live with that for the rest of my life. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. But I needed to tell you this. I needed you to know the truth. Yours, Marcus. The letter slipped from my hands and fluttered to the table. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my heart pounding in my ears. The words on the page blurred as tears filled my eyes, spilling over before I could stop them. An experimental treatment. A chance, however slim, that Grace could have survived. And Marcus had kept it from me. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My grief for Grace, which I thought I had learned to live with, surged back with a vengeance. All this time, I had believed I'd done everything I could for her, that I had fought with everything I had. But now I wasn't so sure. For hours I sat in silence, the letter a constant presence on the table in front of me. My emotions were a tangled mess: rage, sorrow, guilt, even pity. Marcus's words had reopened wounds I thought had healed, forcing me to confront questions I didn't want to ask. Had I failed Grace? Could I have done more if I'd known about the treatment? And what about Marcus? Did his confession change anything about the man he had become? I wanted to hate him. I wanted to throw the letter into the fire and let it burn, along with every memory of him. But as much as I wanted to, I couldn't. His words, his guilt, they were real. For the first time I saw Marcus not as the villain I had painted him to be, but as a deeply flawed, broken man who had made terrible choices out of fear and weakness. That realization didn't excuse him. It didn't erase the pain he had caused or the lives he had destroyed. But it made him human. And that made my feelings all the more complicated. The next morning I went for a walk, hoping the crisp air and the sound of birdsong would help clear my mind. The letter was still fresh in my thoughts, its words echoing with every step I took. By the time I returned home I had made a decision. I wasn't going to write back. There was nothing I could say that would bring Grace back or change the past. But I wasn't going to ignore the letter either. I needed to confront it, to face the truth it held, even if it meant reopening old wounds. That evening I sat down with my journal, the one I had started after Grace's death but had abandoned in the chaos of Marcus's downfall. I wrote down everything I was feeling, every thought and memory the letter had stirred. I wrote about Grace, about her laughter and her strength, about the love that had filled our lives even in the darkest moments. And I wrote about Marcus. I wrote about his betrayal, his weakness, and the pain he had caused. But I also wrote about his confession, about the weight of his guilt and the humanity it revealed. By the time I finished, the pages were filled with raw, unfiltered emotions. I closed the journal and sat back, feeling a strange sense of release. For the first time I wasn't holding it all inside. I was letting it out, letting it go. In the weeks that followed, I continued to reflect on the letter and what it meant for my journey forward. I didn't forgive Marcus, not entirely. But I also didn't let his actions define me. The choices he had made were his burden to bear, not mine. Instead, I focused on Grace, on the light she had brought into my life and the love that would never fade. I channeled my energy into the Grace Foundation, ensuring that other families would have the resources and support they needed to fight for their children. And slowly I began to heal. Not just from Marcus's betrayal, but from the lingering guilt and grief that had weighed me down for so long. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer controlled me. One evening, as I sat by the bay window with a cup of tea, I looked out at the setting sun and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Grace's photo sat on the table beside me, her smile a constant reminder of the love that had carried me through the storm. "I hope you're proud of me," I whispered, my voice soft. And for the first time I believed she was. The decision to visit Marcus wasn't easy. For weeks after reading his letter, I wrestled with whether seeing him face to face was even necessary. Part of me felt I had already moved on, that confronting him might dredge up pain I had worked so hard to bury. But another part of me, the part that had carried Grace's laughter and Marcus's betrayal in equal measure, needed to hear his explanation. Not for him but for me. Closure wasn't something that would come neatly tied with a bow. I knew that. But this visit felt like the final thread I needed to cut before I could truly leave the past behind. The drive to the prison was long and quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound to accompany my thoughts. The landscape blurred by in shades of gray, the winter sky heavy with clouds. By the time I reached the facility, my nerves felt like a tightly coiled spring. I parked the car and sat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I gathered my composure. Inside, the air was sterile and cold. The sharp clang of metal doors and the echo of footsteps down the tiled hallways were unnerving, a stark reminder of where Marcus had ended up. The guard led me to a small visitation room with a table and 2 chairs separated by a thick pane of glass. A phone hung on either side of the barrier, the only means of communication. I sat down and waited. Minutes later, Marcus was led in, flanked by 2 guards. His appearance startled me. The man I had once known as confident, polished, and self-assured now looked frail and hollow. His face was gaunt, his hair streaked with gray, and his eyes carried a weariness I had never seen before. He shuffled to his seat, his cuffs clinking softly as he sat down. For a moment we simply stared at each other through the glass. I picked up the phone first, the cold plastic pressing against my ear. Marcus hesitated, then lifted his own receiver. "You look good," he said awkwardly, his voice raspier than I remembered. I didn't return the sentiment. "Why did you write to me?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. He blinked, caught off guard by my directness. I needed to," he stammered. "I've been carrying that secret for so long and I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. You deserve to know the truth." "The truth," I repeated, my voice sharp. "You mean the truth about how you ran away from Grace when she needed you most? Or the truth about how you kept the possibility of treatment from me because you were too afraid?" Marcus winced, the words hitting him like physical blows. "I know I failed her," he said, his voice cracking. "I failed both of you. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret it." "Regret doesn't change anything," I shot back, my anger simmering just below the surface. "It doesn't bring her back. It doesn't undo the choices you made. So why now? Why confess after all this time?" His hands tightened around the receiver, his knuckles white. "Because I can't carry it anymore," he admitted. "Every night I see her in my dreams. Her smile, her laugh, and then the look on your face when you realized I wasn't there. It haunts me." Narrator's name. "It's my punishment and I deserve it." I studied him through the glass, searching for any sign of manipulation, any trace of the man who had once lied so easily. But all I saw was a broken shell, someone crushed under the weight of his own guilt. And for the first time I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I just felt nothing. "I came here because I needed to hear it from you," I said finally. "I needed to know if you truly understood the damage you caused. And now I do." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of hope and despair. "Does that mean you forgive me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. I thought about Grace, about the love she had brought into our lives, and about the pain Marcus had inflicted. Forgiveness was such a simple word, but it carried so much weight. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said honestly. "But I can let go. I can move forward. And that's enough for me." His shoulders slumped, as though the words had both relieved and defeated him. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry. For everything." I nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. "Goodbye, Marcus." I stood, placing the receiver back on its cradle. Marcus watched me through the glass, his expression unreadable as I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. The drive home felt lighter, as though a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. The gray skies seemed brighter, the road ahead clearer. Marcus's confession hadn't changed the past, but it had given me the clarity I needed to move beyond it. That evening I sat by the bay window with a journal in my lap, writing down everything I had experienced at the prison. The anger, the sadness, the strange sense of closure, it all spilled onto the page, raw and unfiltered. When I finished, I closed the journal and placed it on the table beside Grace's photo. "I did it," I whispered, looking at her smiling face. I finally let him go. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater. But in that silence I felt Grace's presence, her warmth filling the space around me. And for the first time in years I felt truly free. The next morning I woke up with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The memories of Marcus's betrayal and Grace's loss were still there, but they no longer consumed me. They were a part of my story, yes, but they didn't define it. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sunlight dance across the floor. The world felt new, full of possibilities I hadn't dared to dream of before. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The days following my visit to Marcus felt like stepping into a new world. One where the ghosts of the past no longer had the power to hold me back. For years, my life had been defined by grief, betrayal, and the weight of unanswered questions. But now, for the first time, I felt truly unburdened. The confrontation had been my final act of closure, and as I walked away from that prison, I knew I had left more than just Marcus behind. I had left behind the guilt, the anger, and the what-ifs that had haunted me for so long. Back at home, I decided it was time to create a physical representation of my emotional shift. I spent a weekend organizing every corner of my apartment, sorting through boxes that had remained unopened since my move. It was a therapeutic process, one that allowed me to confront the pieces of my past I had been avoiding. I started with Grace's belongings. Her toys, her clothes, her books. Each item was a bittersweet reminder of the joy she had brought into my life. I took my time holding each piece and letting the memories wash over me. There was no rush, no need to push through the emotions. When I was ready, I carefully packed some of her things to donate, knowing they could bring comfort to another child. Other items, like her favorite stuffed bunny and the drawings she had made for me, I kept, placing them in a memory box I could revisit whenever I needed to feel close to her. As I worked, I felt a sense of lightness begin to settle over me. My apartment no longer felt like a temporary refuge but a true home. A space where I could nurture new beginnings while honoring the past. With my physical space in order, I turned my attention to the future. The Grace Foundation had grown steadily over the past year, and I knew it was time to take the next step. Inspired by the letters and emails I had received from families we had helped, I began planning a new initiative, a mentorship program for parents navigating the challenges of caring for children with terminal illnesses. The idea filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I reached out to volunteers, healthcare professionals, and community leaders, building a network of support that would allow the program to thrive. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding, each small success a reminder of why I had started the foundation in the first place. Grace's memory wasn't just alive, it was making a difference in the lives of so many. Outside of my work with the foundation, I began exploring other passions I had put on hold for too long. Photography, which had once been a hobby, became a source of creative fulfillment. I started taking my camera on long walks, capturing the beauty of everyday moments, the golden light of sunset filtering through trees, the laughter of children playing in the park, the intricate details of a flower in bloom. Each photo felt like a celebration of life, a way of seeing the world through Grace's eyes. One of my favorite projects was creating a photo journal dedicated to her memory. I filled it with images that reminded me of her, soft pastel skies, butterflies dancing among wildflowers, and the sparkle of sunlight on water. It was a quiet, personal tribute, one that brought me comfort and joy. As I opened myself to new experiences, I found that people began to re-enter my life in unexpected ways. Old friends who had drifted away during my darkest days reached out, their presence a reminder of the connections I had once cherished. New friendships blossomed as well, born from shared interests and a mutual desire to build something meaningful. One evening, I attended a community art event hosted by a local gallery. It was a small gathering, intimate and welcoming, with people mingling over wine and discussing the pieces on display. I brought a few of my own photographs to share, unsure of how they would be received. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Strangers approached me with kind words and genuine interest, their encouragement sparking a confidence I hadn't felt in years. Among the attendees was a woman named Clara, an artist who specialized in mixed media. We struck up a conversation that quickly turned into a friendship, bonded by our shared love of creativity and a mutual understanding of loss. Clara had lost her partner to cancer several years earlier, and her art reflected her journey of healing. Through her, I found not only inspiration but also a kindred spirit, someone who understood the complexities of grief and the resilience it took to rebuild. As the months passed, I began to rediscover the simple joys of life. I allowed myself to laugh again, to savor moments of happiness without the guilt that had once overshadowed them. Whether it was sharing a meal with friends, dancing in the kitchen to Grace's favorite songs, or watching a sunrise with a cup of tea in hand, I embraced each moment as a gift. One particularly beautiful day, I took a drive to the beach, a place that had always held a special significance for Grace and me. Standing at the edge of the water, the waves lapping gently at my feet, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The sky stretched endlessly above me, the horizon a reminder of the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. I closed my eyes and imagined Grace beside me, her laughter mingling with the sound of the surf. "Thank you," I whispered, the words carried away by the breeze. "For everything." In time I began to imagine a future filled with possibility. The wounds of the past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined who I was. I was stronger now, more resilient, and deeply grateful for the love that had carried me through even the darkest moments. Grace's memory was no longer a source of sorrow but a wellspring of strength. Her light lived on in the work I did, the connections I nurtured, and the joy I allowed myself to feel. She had taught me the power of love, and that love would guide me as I continued to move forward. As I sat at my desk one evening, drafting plans for the Foundation's next event, I glanced at the photo of Grace that hung on the wall above me. Her smile was as radiant as ever, a constant reminder of the love that had shaped my life. "I think we're doing pretty well, don't you?" I said aloud, smiling softly. The room was quiet, but in that stillness I felt her presence, warm and comforting. It was as though she was saying, "Yes, Mom. You're doing great." And for the first time in a long time I truly believed it. The story of my life wasn't over. It was just beginning. The pages ahead were blank, waiting to be filled with moments of love, joy, and purpose. And as I picked up my pen to write the next chapter, I felt ready to embrace whatever the future held. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The idea to expand the Grace Foundation had been brewing in my mind for months. But it wasn't until that quiet evening by the bay window, Grace's photo smiling down at me, that I truly committed to it. What had started as a local initiative to support a handful of families had grown into something much larger than I'd ever imagined. And yet I knew there was more to be done. More lives to touch, more families to help, more love to share in Grace's name. The next morning I dove into the work with a renewed sense of purpose. My first step was to assemble a team, a group of people as passionate about the Foundation's mission as I was. Clara, my friend from the art event, became my first recruit. Her creative vision and personal experience with loss made her an invaluable addition. Together we reached out to others in the community, building a network of dedicated volunteers, healthcare professionals, and advocates who shared our dream of expanding the Foundation's reach. With the team in place, I turned my attention to securing the funding we would need to grow. I drafted grant proposals, scheduled meetings with potential donors, and hosted fundraising events that combined creativity with purpose. One event, a gallery showcase featuring art and photography inspired by the stories of the families we'd helped, was a resounding success. People from all walks of life came to support the cause, their generosity and compassion a testament to the power of community. As the donations poured in, I felt a sense of validation that went beyond the financial. This wasn't just about raising money, it was about raising awareness, about showing people the importance of the work we were doing. Each dollar meant another family could receive the support they needed. Another child could experience joy in the midst of hardship. Another piece of Grace's legacy could come to life. The turning point came when the Foundation achieved a high-profile success story. A single mother named Erica, whose son Jonah was battling a rare form of cancer, had come to us in desperation. She had exhausted every resource, every ounce of strength, trying to give Jonah the care he needed. The Foundation stepped in, providing financial assistance for his treatments and emotional support for Erica through our mentorship program. Months later, Jonah's treatment led to a miraculous recovery. His story was picked up by a local news station and soon it spread like wildfire. Reporters called, asking about the Foundation's role in Jonah's journey. Invitations to speak at events and conferences flooded my inbox. Overnight, the Grace Foundation became a symbol of hope and resilience, its name synonymous with the kind of love and compassion Grace had embodied. The recognition brought new opportunities. Corporations offered sponsorships, prominent figures reached out to collaborate, and organizations across the country expressed interest in partnering with us. It was overwhelming, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time, I saw the possibility of taking the Foundation national, a dream I hadn't dared to articulate until now. As the Foundation grew, so did my sense of fulfillment. The work was demanding, often exhausting, but it gave my life a purpose I hadn't felt since Grace was alive. Each family we helped, each life we touched felt like another way to keep her memory alive. She wasn't just a part of my past, she was a part of everything we were building. One evening, after a particularly long day, I sat in the office reviewing a stack of thank you letters from families we had supported. Each letter told a story of gratitude and resilience, of lives changed by the Foundation's work. As I read them, I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sadness but of profound joy. This was Grace's legacy. This was her light shining through the darkness. The national expansion of the Foundation brought new challenges, but it also brought new rewards. We opened branches in cities across the country, each one staffed by passionate individuals who believed in our mission. We developed programs tailored to the unique needs of different communities, ensuring that no family would feel forgotten or unsupported. At one of our national conferences, I stood on stage in front of hundreds of supporters, sharing the story of how the Foundation had come to be. As I spoke about Grace, her strength, her kindness, her unwavering spirit, I saw tears in the eyes of the audience. Her story had touched them just as it had touched me. And in that moment, I realized that Grace wasn't just my daughter. She was a symbol of hope for everyone in that room. In the quieter moments, I often found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The woman who had once felt broken and lost was now a leader, an advocate, a builder of something greater than herself. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed, becoming a source of strength rather than sorrow. Marcus's betrayal and Grace's loss were chapters in my story, but they weren't the whole story. The pages I was writing now were filled with love, purpose, and the unshakable belief that even the darkest moments could lead to something beautiful. One sunny afternoon, I visited a new playground the Foundation had funded in Grace's name. The laughter of children filled the air as they ran across the bright, colorful structures. A plaque near the entrance read, "In loving memory of Grace, a light that shines forever." I sat on a nearby bench watching the children play and felt a deep sense of peace. This was what Grace would have wanted. A world where joy and love outweighed the pain, where her light could guide others even in her absence. A little girl with curly hair and a wide smile ran up to me, holding out a flower she had picked from the grass. "This is for you," she said, her voice sweet and earnest. I took the flower, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," I said, smiling down at her. As she ran back to join her friends, I held the flower to my chest, feeling Grace's presence in the laughter and sunshine around me. She was with me in every step I took, in every life the Foundation touched, in every moment of joy I allowed myself to feel. The story of my life had taken twists and turns I never could have predicted. It had been filled with heartbreak and loss, but also with love and resilience. And through it all, Grace had been my guiding star, her memory a constant reminder of the strength we carry within us. As I walked away from the playground that day, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't known before. Grace's legacy wasn't just a foundation or a playground or a name on a plaque. It was a living, breathing force, a testament to the power of love to overcome even the deepest pain. This was my new beginning, my purpose, my joy. And it was all because of Grace. At my fiancé med school graduation party in Miami, funded by my $900 monthly and $6,000 per term, he told security, "She doesn't belong here." His mother laughed. "You thought you were part of this family?" I didn't argue. I just smiled, left without a scene, and made a silent plan he'd regret. "She doesn't belong here." The words sliced through the celebration noise, sharp and sudden like broken glass. I froze mid-step, champagne flute trembling in my hand as Kevin's voice, the same voice that had whispered forever against my skin countless nights, dismissed my existence with casual cruelty. His mother Diana's laughter followed, cold and cutting. "You thought you were part of this family? But I'm getting ahead of myself. That moment would come later. First, you need to understand who I really am. My name is Rachel Mitchell. To most people at Miami General Hospital, I'm just another overworked administrator making $900 a month, stretching every dollar to support my fiancé through medical school. The woman who brings homemade lunches in reused containers. The one who wears the same 3 professional outfits rotated carefully to appear like a diverse wardrobe. The eager-to-please girlfriend who somehow manages to transfer $6,000 each term to cover Kevin's tuition. What no one knows, what I've hidden meticulously for 3 years, is that I'm actually the only daughter of Arthur Mitchell, whose Mitchell Properties dominates the Miami skyline. That modest bank account I check anxiously in the hospital cafeteria? A carefully maintained facade. The real money sits in a trust fund that would make Kevin's jaw drop if he ever saw the balance. This morning followed the same exhausting routine. I woke at 5:30 a.m. in my small apartment. Yes, I maintain 2 residences, and dressed in a simple blouse I deliberately purchased from a discount store. The calculator came out as I pretended to balance my checkbook at the kitchen counter, creating the appearance of financial struggle that Kevin has come to expect. "Babe, don't forget I need the tuition payment by Friday," Kevin reminded me, not looking up from his medical journal. He lounged on my worn sofa, his designer watch, which he claimed was a replica, catching the morning light. "I've got it covered," I answered, just as I always do. He kissed my forehead absently before leaving. "You're the best. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Neither do I, Kevin. Neither do I." By 7 a.m. I was at my desk in the hospital administration office, processing medical billing claims. A job I'm actually overqualified for with my MBA from Wharton. But it's the perfect cover. No one questions why the boss's daughter would take a low-paying hospital position, because no one knows I'm the boss's daughter. At lunch, I stepped outside to take a different kind of call. "The Singapore investment is up 12%, I informed my father, speaking softly to ensure privacy. "We should move on the property near Brickell before the end of the quarter." "Rachel, this charade has gone on long enough," Arthur sighed, his voice conveying the familiar mixture of concern and frustration. "You're managing millions in real estate while pretending you can barely make rent. For what? A man who doesn't even know who you really are." "That's exactly why I need to do this, Dad," I replied, watching hospital staff walk past, none of them aware that the woman in the sensible shoes was in the middle of a multi-million-dollar negotiation. Kevin fell in love with me, not the Mitchell fortune. The silence from my father spoke volumes. "Friday night dinner as usual?" I asked, changing the subject. "Your room is always ready," he answered, his tone softening. "Margot's making your favorite." I smiled, thinking of our family's longtime housekeeper. "Tell her I'm looking forward to it." These Friday transitions are the most jarring part of my double life. I leave the hospital as Rachel the administrator, drive to a discreet parking garage, and change clothes in the back seat of my modest Honda. Then I transfer to the BMW I keep there, drive to my family's waterfront estate, and walk through those imposing doors as Rachel Mitchell, heiress and business prodigy. Last Friday I arrived to find my father in his study reviewing property assessments. He looked up as I entered, his expression brightening despite his worries. "There's my girl." He embraced me, then held me at arm's length. "You look tired, Rachel." "Double shift," I explained, settling into the leather chair across from him. "All this secrecy. It's not healthy," he said, pouring me a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than my supposed monthly salary. "If this man truly loves you." "That's what I need to find out," I interrupted gently. "Love that's built on wealth isn't love at all. You taught me that after Mom died and the friends disappeared." The engagement ring caught the light as I reached for my wine glass. It was small, a 1/4-carat diamond in a simple setting. Kevin had presented it with dramatic flair, claiming he'd saved for months. I cherished it more than the family jewels locked in our vault, believing it represented true sacrifice. What I didn't know then was that Kevin had purchased a Rolex for himself the very same week. "I've finally set a date," I told my father, changing the subject. "After Kevin's graduation ceremony next month at the celebration party. I've already purchased the penthouse overlooking the hospital campus. I'll give him the keys there, show him who I really am." Arthur's eyebrows rose. "And you're certain this is wise?" 3 years, Dad. 3 years of proving he loves me for me, not for what my last name can provide. Once he's a doctor, our lives can merge properly." My father didn't look convinced, but he respected my decision. The truth I couldn't admit even to myself at the time was that tiny doubts had begun to form, little inconsistencies in Kevin's stories, moments when his mask seemed to slip. The next morning found me back in administrator mode, reviewing budget reports at my desk when Kevin appeared unexpectedly. "Lunch?" he suggested, flashing the smile that had first made my heart skip. We sat in the hospital cafeteria, my homemade sandwich a stark contrast to the expensive takeout he'd brought. I watched him talk animatedly about a difficult diagnosis, trying to ignore the nagging question. Where did the money for those frequent takeout meals come from when he claimed crushing student debt? I can't wait until we can afford real vacations, he said, gesturing with his fork. No more of these budget constraints. I nodded, thinking of the keys to the penthouse hidden in my desk drawer at home, imagining his face when he realized the woman he'd chosen, regular, ordinary Rachel, could give him everything he'd dreamed of and more. Just a few more weeks, I said softly. Until graduation? God, yes. Finally. Until everything changes, I added, not knowing then just how prophetic those words would be. That evening I slipped away early, driving to the penthouse I'd purchased near the hospital, the graduation surprise that represented the merging of my two lives. Standing in that empty space with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Miami, I allowed myself to imagine our future here. The home we'd build once the pretense was gone, once he knew the real me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd created this elaborate deception to ensure Kevin loved me authentically, not my fortune. But in doing so, I'd never allowed him to know the authentic Rachel at all. Just a few more weeks, I whispered to the empty rooms, and no more lies between us. I couldn't have known then that the only real lie in our relationship was the one I wasn't yet aware of, and it had nothing to do with my hidden wealth. The first time I noticed something genuinely wrong was on a Tuesday evening in March. Kevin had texted that he would be late, another study group for an important cardiology exam. I'd prepared his favorite pasta, timed perfectly for his usual 8 p.m. return. By 10:30 the food was cold and I was staring at my phone. When he finally arrived just before midnight, the scent of unfamiliar perfume clung faintly to his collar. Not overpowering, just present enough to notice when he leaned in to kiss my cheek. The library was packed, he explained, dropping his bag by the door. Dr. Winters is notorious for his trick questions. I nodded, not mentioning that I'd called the medical library at 9 p.m. and learned they'd closed early for maintenance. A small lie, perhaps, but it planted a seed of doubt that would grow with alarming speed. There's pasta in the fridge, I said instead. I grabbed something with the group, he replied, heading for the shower without another word. The next morning I found his wallet on the bathroom counter and did something I'd never done before. I looked inside. Behind his student ID was a receipt from Martino's, an upscale steakhouse downtown, time-stamped 8:27 p.m. $157 for 2 people. The study group appeared to have been very selective. This small discovery triggered a subtle shift in my awareness. Suddenly I began noticing patterns I'd been blind to before. The broke medical student narrative Kevin had carefully constructed started showing inconsistencies like a cheap sweater unraveling at the seams. This place is so cramped, Kevin complained the following weekend, gesturing around my deliberately modest apartment. I don't understand why you won't look for something better. Even on your salary there must be nicer options. It's what I can afford, I answered simply, maintaining my cover while wondering why the apartment that had been cozy when we first met was now cramped 3 years later. If you'd let me help with your resume, you could get a better paying position, he continued, scrolling through his phone. Someone with your education should be making more. The irony of him offering career advice to the daughter of Arthur Mitchell, who managed a real estate portfolio worth hundreds of millions, wasn't lost on me. But something darker lurked beneath his sudden interest in my living situation. If I was supposedly struggling to make ends meet, why was he pushing me to stretch myself thinner with a more expensive apartment? 2 days later I found my answer. While searching for a missing earring in Kevin's overnight bag, my fingers brushed against a small velvet pouch. Inside was a pair of diamond stud earrings from Tiffany's, far more expensive than anything he'd ever given me. The receipt showed they'd been purchased just last week. My stomach twisted as I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. The earrings weren't meant for me, that much was obvious. But who were they for? And how could he afford such a luxury when I was supposedly covering his tuition? I said nothing but began paying closer attention to our finances. Kevin had always been vague about his student loans and family contributions. Now I discreetly tracked every dollar I gave him against his actual expenses. The numbers didn't add up. Thousands were disappearing into an unaccounted void. The hospital holiday party in December brought the next red flag. I'd spent weeks preparing, choosing a dress that was nice enough to be appropriate but not so expensive it would raise questions about my fictional budget. Kevin had been strangely reluctant to attend, claiming he needed to study, but finally agreed after I reminded him how important networking would be for his residency applications. We arrived separately. I'd been working late finalizing year-end reports. When I entered the ballroom, I spotted Kevin near the bar with a group of residents. Drawing closer, I heard him mid-conversation. Just waiting for the right opportunity after graduation. My roommate works in administration here, actually. There she is now. Roommate. Not fiancé. Not girlfriend. Roommate. He noticed me and his expression flickered momentarily before recovering. Rachel. I was just talking about you. He quickly corrected himself. By fiancé everyone. Throughout the evening, I caught him glancing nervously toward the entrance, checking his phone repeatedly. When I asked who he was expecting, he laughed too loudly and claimed he was monitoring a patient's lab results remotely. Later that night, while Kevin was in the bathroom, his phone lit up on the counter. I shouldn't have looked, but something compelled me. The message preview glowed mockingly. Asterisk missing you tonight. Can't wait until you're done playing doctor with the plain Jane. Last night was amazing. Same time this weekend. Asterisk. When Kevin returned, I held up his phone. You got a text. He snatched it quickly, glanced at the screen, and his face performed an impressive series of micro-expressions before settling on annoyed dismissal. Spam, he muttered, deleting the message. These scammers are getting more personal. I nodded as if I believed him, but something cracked permanently inside me that night. The perfume, the receipts, the earrings, the roommate comment, and now this text. They formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. At our next Friday dinner, my father noticed my distraction. You've barely touched your food, Arthur observed as we sat in his study afterward. What's wrong? For the first time, I confided my growing suspicions. With each example I shared, my father's expression darkened. I know you wanted to do this your way, he said finally, but I think it's time we learned exactly who this man is. I shook my head. I need to figure this out myself. Rachel. His tone was gentle but firm. Sometimes love blinds us to what's right in front of our eyes. 3 days later, an envelope appeared on my desk at the estate. Inside were photographs. Kevin entering a luxury high-rise in Brickell, the Avalon, one of Miami's most exclusive addresses. Additional photos showed him using a key card, clearly comfortable with the building. According to the private investigator's notes, he visited this location 3 times in the past week, staying overnight twice. He has an apartment there? I asked my father incredulously, spreading the photos across his desk. Not in his name, Arthur replied. The unit is leased to a shell company. My investigator is still tracing the ownership. I stared at the images, trying to reconcile them with the man who complained about my cheap apartment while apparently maintaining a secret residence in one of Miami's most expensive buildings. There's more, my father said quietly, sliding another photo across the desk. This one showed Kevin entering the building again, but not alone. A woman walked beside him, his arm around her waist. They were laughing about something. She was stunning, tall, elegantly dressed, entirely unfamiliar. The crack in my heart widened into a chasm. What are you going to do? Arthur asked. I gathered the photos carefully, my mind already calculating, planning. Nothing. Yet. Rachel. His graduation is in 3 weeks, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I think it's time I learned exactly what game Kevin is playing before I reveal my cards. I left my father's study with the envelope of evidence, the foundation of my carefully constructed reality crumbling beneath my feet. The woman I'd pretended to be was running out of reasons to keep pretending. The photos burned a hole in my desk drawer for 3 days while I wrestled with what to do next. Part of me wanted immediate confrontation, to throw the evidence in Kevin's face and watch him try to explain it away. But the strategist in me, the businesswoman who had learned patience from Arthur Mitchell himself, knew better. I needed the complete picture before making my move. My position in hospital administration gave me access to the scheduling system. I told myself it was just verification, not an invasion of privacy, when I logged in after hours and searched Kevin's rotation schedule. What I found made my stomach turn. Every Thursday afternoon for the past 4 months, Kevin had blocked an hour for a recurring patient appointment, a woman named Vanessa Reeves. The first red flag was the location. Not the general clinic where residents typically saw patients, but a private consultation room in the East Wing. The second was the lack of notes in her file, unusual for a recurring patient. Social media filled in the blanks with brutal efficiency. Vanessa Reeves, pharmaceutical sales representative, her profile filled with Miami nightlife photos. And there, buried in her Instagram from just 2 weeks ago, a picture at a rooftop bar. Though Kevin wasn't tagged, I recognized his watch, his hand resting possessively on her lower back at the edge of the frame. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop. This wasn't just an affair. The calculated nature of it, using hospital resources, blocking official time, suggested something more deliberate. The next morning I made a decision. If I was going to understand what was happening, I needed to talk to someone who might have experienced the same thing. Someone who knew Kevin before me. Finding Autumn Sullivan wasn't difficult. She transferred to Baptist Health 2 years ago, around the time Kevin and I started dating. I sent her a simple email requesting a meeting about staffing coordination between hospitals, using my administrative role as cover. We met at a small cafe halfway between our hospitals. Autumn arrived looking professionally polished but wary, her red hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Recognition flickered across her face when she saw me. "You're Kevin's fiancée," she said before I could introduce myself. "I've seen your picture on his desk." I nodded, suddenly unsure how to proceed. "I'm sorry for the pretense about hospital staffing." She studied me for a moment, then sighed. "What did he do?" The directness of her question caught me off guard. I think he's seeing someone else. Maybe multiple someones. "And you want to know if this is a pattern," she finished, signaling for coffee. "How much are you supporting him financially?" The question hit like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "Tuition, rent, living expenses." She wasn't being cruel, just matter of fact. For me it was about $30,000 over 18 months. I picked up extra shifts, maxed out credit cards. He said we were investing in our future. My throat tightened. "Why did you transfer hospitals?" "Because after I caught him with someone else, a pharmacy student named Bianca, he made my life unbearable. Told colleagues I was unstable, that I'd been stalking him after a brief fling." Her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. It was easier to start fresh than fight the rumors. "Did he?" I hesitated. "Did he ask for specific amounts?" "Regular payments." She looked at me sharply. $6,000 per term for tuition. Plus, emergencies. "How did you know?" The identical amount couldn't be coincidence. Just a hunch. Autumn leaned forward. "Listen, Rachel. Kevin isn't just a cheater. He's systematic. After we broke up, I found notes he'd kept about me. How much I made, my promotion timeline, even my parents' financial situation. Like I was an investment he was researching." My pulse quickened. "Do you know how to reach Bianca?" "She works for Meridian Pharmaceuticals now." Autumn pulled out her phone. "We keep in touch. Sort of a survivors group of 2. She smiled grimly. 3, counting you." Bianca agreed to meet us that same afternoon. She arrived looking like someone who had processed her anger and emerged stronger. Designer suit, confident stride, eyes that held compassion when they met mine. "I funded his MCT prep course," she explained over iced tea. "Paid for his applications to medical schools. Covered rent while he studied. Then suddenly I wasn't supportive enough of his dreams. 2 weeks later he was with Autumn. Who had better hospital connections," Autumn added bitterly. "And then he moved on to you," Bianca said gently, "with your administrative position." I swallowed hard. "How much did he take from you?" "About $20,000 all told. My first year's salary as a pharmaceutical rep." She shrugged, but I could see the lingering hurt. Expensive life lesson. As they shared their stories, the pattern became undeniable. Kevin hadn't just cheated. He'd developed a calculated system of financial exploitation, moving from woman to woman as they served their purpose, each unknowingly funding different stages of his medical career. The final piece fell into place that evening. I'd never deliberately searched Kevin's things before, but now I entered his campus office with cold determination. The top drawers held nothing unusual: medical journals, stethoscope, protein bars. The bottom drawer was locked, but the small key I'd found hidden in his desk lamp at home fit perfectly. Inside was a leather-bound journal. Not a diary, something far more chilling. Spreadsheets. Calculations. Names with detailed notes. Bianca Martinez. Family middle class but stable. Salary $65,000 with commission potential. Good for initial med school expenses but limited long-term growth. Emotional attachment forming too quickly, becoming demanding about commitment. Timeline to transition. Complete. Autumn Sullivan. Hospital connections excellent. Nursing salary with overtime potential $75,000 plus. Professional growth path limited. Growing suspicious about finances. Timeline to transition. Complete. Rachel Mitchell. Admin position with growth potential. Extremely financially responsible. No family wealth visible but excellent money management. Completely trustworthy and non-questioning about financial support. Potential to support through residency. Timeline, 80% complete. My fingers trembled as I turned to the most recent entry. Vanessa Reeves. Family connections to Brickell Medical Community. Father on board at Miami Central. Income $90,000 plus with pharmaceutical bonuses. Family wealth significant. Already secured apartment access. Timeline to transition. Preparations complete, waiting for residency confirmation before finalizing. The final page contained a detailed chart, a literal investment portfolio of women with amounts extracted, time invested, and return on investment calculations. I was listed as his most successful investment to date, with over $140,000 contributed over 3 years. Below my name was a note that made my blood run cold. Engagement strategy working perfectly. No suspicion. Will maintain until residency secured through her hospital connections, then execute transition to Vanessa post-graduation. I photographed every page, my vision blurring with tears that I refused to shed. This wasn't just betrayal, it was predatory, clinical, sociopathic. When I replaced the journal and locked the drawer, something had fundamentally changed inside me. The hurt was still there but now surrounded by a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't about saving my relationship. It wasn't even about revenge exactly. This was about justice. As I drove home I called Autumn and Bianca asking them to meet again. Bring financial records, I said. Everything you can find about what you gave him. What are you planning? Bianca asked. Something fitting, I replied, my mind already calculating the precise architecture of Kevin's downfall. He's been investing in his future through us. I think it's time for his portfolio to crash. For the 2 weeks leading up to Kevin's graduation, I lived a strange double life within my already divided existence. By day, I continued playing the role of devoted fiancé, smiling through discussions about our future while secretly coordinating with Autumn and Bianca to document every dollar Kevin had extracted from us. By night, I made arrangements for what I still believed would be the moment my two worlds finally merged: Kevin's graduation celebration. The Ocean Terrace Hotel, one of Miami's most exclusive beachfront properties, wasn't the venue a hospital administrator making $900 monthly could possibly afford. I told Kevin it was funded through a special collection among hospital staff and his fellow graduates. A plausible explanation he accepted without question, too focused on his upcoming moment of glory to notice the impossibility of the math. In reality, I arranged everything through 3 different event planners, using shell companies linked to my trust but untraceable to the Mitchell name. The ballroom overlooking the Atlantic cost more for one night than my supposed annual salary, every crystal champagne flute and orchid centerpiece selected with care. This was to be the night that changed everything. I wanted it to be perfect, though for entirely different reasons than I'd originally planned. The irony wasn't lost on me as I dressed for the evening, selecting a simple blue dress that still maintained my modest means facade. The penthouse keys I'd intended to present to Kevin sat in my jewelry box, replaced in my evening clutch by copies of his damning journal entries and a small digital recorder. Kevin and I arrived separately. He went early for the graduate procession while I came later for the reception. The moment I entered the glittering ballroom, I sensed something was off. Conversations stuttered as I passed. Glances were exchanged, followed by whispers. A woman I didn't recognize studied me with barely concealed amusement before turning to her companion with a comment that sparked uncomfortable laughter. Kevin stood across the room in his graduation regalia, surrounded by admirers, his mother Diana at his side. She'd flown in from Boston specifically for the ceremony, the first time we'd met in person despite our 3-year engagement. When Kevin spotted me, his smile faltered almost imperceptibly before recovering. He waved but made no move to approach or introduce me to the group around him. For 30 minutes, I circulated solo through the party I'd arranged and paid for, making polite conversation while watching Kevin and Diana deliberately work the room in patterns that somehow never intersected with mine. Each time I approached, they would mysteriously shift to another conversation cluster. "You must be Rachel," a voice finally said behind me. I turned to find Diana Blackwood, Kevin's mother, appraising me with cool calculation. Up close, I could see where Kevin had inherited his charm, and his ability to mask true intentions behind a pleasant expression. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm so happy to finally meet you," I replied, extending my hand. She took it briefly, her grip limp and dismissive. "Kevin tells me you work in the billing department or something." "Hospital administration," I corrected gently. "How nice." Her tone suggested it was anything but. I always admire people who are content with modest achievements. Before I could respond, she glanced over my shoulder and brightened artificially. "Oh, I simply must say hello to the Hendersons. Kevin mentioned they might have an opening in their practice." She touched my arm with cold fingers. "We'll catch up properly later, dear." She disappeared into the crowd, leaving me with the distinct impression I'd been assessed and found wanting. I hadn't expected warmth from Kevin's mother, but such naked disdain was surprising, especially since, according to my fictional backstory, I was the supportive girlfriend who had helped fund her son's education. As the evening progressed, Kevin continued his strange avoidance, making brief appearances at my side only when it seemed too obvious that we weren't interacting. During one such moment, his phone buzzed with a text that made him frown. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just a patient concern," he replied smoothly. "Nothing urgent." I knew he was lying. Residents didn't manage independent patient concerns, especially not on graduation night. 10 minutes later, he excused himself to the restroom for the third time that hour. Something compelled me to follow him, maintaining a discreet distance. Instead of turning toward the restrooms, Kevin slipped down a service corridor that led to a small terrace overlooking the ocean. Diana was already waiting there. I positioned myself just inside the doorway, hidden by a decorative palm. Their voices carried clearly in the night air. "She's starting to notice something's wrong," Kevin was saying. "I need to be careful these last few weeks." Diana scoffed. "I don't understand why you're dragging this out. The girl is obviously beneath you. No family connections, mediocre job, not even particularly attractive." "She thinks we're getting married next spring," Kevin replied. "I need to maintain that until my residency position is confirmed. Her supervisor is on the placement committee." "And Vanessa?" "She's getting impatient." "It's under control. Her father's already hinted he can get me into the cardiology fellowship track directly. Just another month at most." I felt oddly calm as I listened, as if I were observing a scene in a movie rather than the dissolution of my own relationship. "Her salary's not great, but every dollar helps," Kevin continued. "Once I'm settled at Miami Central, I'll break things off. Tell her I need to focus on my career." Diana laughed. "You've always been good at managing your investments." "Yes, Mom, I've already lined up someone better. Rachel's just investment material, not family material." The words should have hurt, but instead they simply confirmed what I already knew. I stepped back, intending to retreat before they returned inside, but collided with a waiter. His tray of empty glasses clattered to the carpet. Kevin and Diana turned sharply at the noise. For a moment no one spoke. The look of panic that crossed Kevin's face was almost worth the 3 years of deception. I straightened my shoulders and walked directly toward them, my heart pounding but my expression perfectly composed. Diana recovered first, her face transforming into a mask of social politeness. "Rachel, dear, we were just coming to find you," she lied smoothly. I looked at Kevin, whose expression was cycling rapidly through shock, calculation, and damage control. "How much did you hear?" he finally asked. "Enough." I took another step toward them, and something in my expression must have alarmed Kevin. He glanced around, spotting a security guard patrolling the terrace perimeter. With a subtle gesture, he beckoned the man over. "Is there a problem here, sir?" the guard asked. Kevin's transformation was immediate and complete. Gone was any trace of the panic-stricken man caught in a lie. In his place stood a confident young doctor, radiating authority. Yes, he said calmly. She doesn't belong here. Could you please escort her out? The guard looked confused, glancing between us. Sir. Diana laughed, then a sound like breaking glass. You thought you were part of this family? Oh, honey. Other guests had begun to notice the commotion, turning to stare. I felt their eyes like physical touches, curious, pitying, entertained by the unexpected drama. In that crystallizing moment of public humiliation, with 3 years of lies exposed under the glittering chandeliers of a party I had secretly funded, I made a decision that would alter everything that followed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't expose Kevin's scheme or reveal my true identity. Instead, I smiled. With deliberate calm, I removed the modest engagement ring from my finger. The ring he'd claimed had cleaned out his savings, but that I now knew had likely been purchased with another woman's money. I held it up to the light for a moment, then dropped it with a soft clink into Kevin's champagne glass. Congratulations on your graduation, Dr. Blackwood, I said evenly. I wish you exactly the future you deserve. Then I turned and walked out, my head high, my steps measured, ignoring the whispers that followed me across the ballroom. Not a single tear fell until I was safely inside my car, the door closed against the world. Only then did I permit myself one moment of pure raw grief for the relationship I had thought was real. One moment to mourn the love that had never existed. Then I dried my eyes, started the engine, and began mentally calculating exactly how to dismantle Kevin Blackwood's carefully constructed future. I didn't drive to my small apartment that night. There was no reason to maintain the charade any longer. Instead, I drove directly to the waterfront high-rise where my actual residence waited. A penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay that I'd purchased 3 years earlier but rarely used, maintaining it only as a convenient meeting place for business associates who couldn't know about my dual identity. The doorman's eyes widened slightly as I stepped from my modest Honda rather than the usual town car. Good evening, Ms. Mitchell. It's been some time. Hello, George. I'll be staying here full-time now. Very good, ma'am. Shall I have your things brought up from the car? I shook my head. There's nothing there I need anymore. The private elevator whisked me to the top floor. When the doors opened directly into my foyer, the contrast from the cramped apartment I'd shared with Kevin was startling. Expansive windows showcased Miami's glittering skyline. Modern art adorned walls that soared to 16-foot ceilings. Everything gleamed with the quiet luxury of a space designed for someone who never needed to display their wealth to feel its worth. I kicked off my heels and walked barefoot across cool marble to the master bathroom, peeling away my affordable blue dress as I went. The scalding shower I stepped into felt like a ritual cleansing, washing away not just the evening's humiliation but 3 years of deliberate diminishment. As hot water pounded against my skin, I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes of grief. 10 minutes to mourn not just Kevin, who had never been the man I thought, but the dream he had represented. The possibility of being loved for myself rather than my family name or fortune. When I emerged wrapped in a plush robe, my skin flushed pink from the heat, I was transformed. The meek administrator was gone. In her place stood Rachel Mitchell, daughter of Arthur Mitchell, heir to a real estate empire, and a businesswoman formidable in her own right. I ignored the 17 missed calls and 29 text messages from Kevin, each one more desperate than the last as he realized what his casual cruelty might cost him. Instead, I made a different call. Dad? It's me. You were right. I'm ready to be a Mitchell again. The plan came together with clinical precision over the next 48 hours. I didn't waste energy on dramatic gestures or emotional outbursts. Kevin had treated me like a business investment. I would return the favor by systematically dismantling the future he'd built on the backs of the women he'd exploited. My first official move came Monday morning. Rather than reporting to my modest administrative office, I walked into the executive suite of Miami General Hospital and requested a meeting with Dr. Harold Winters, chairman of the board. Rachel, he greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. We'd met at numerous charity functions over the years, though he'd never connected me with the hospital employee who shared my name. Your father mentioned you might be stopping by. What can I do for you? I placed a slim folder on his desk. I'd like to introduce myself properly, Dr. Winters. I'm Rachel Mitchell, daughter of Arthur Mitchell, and as of this morning, majority stakeholder in the Coastal Medical Group. His eyebrows rose sharply. The Coastal Medical Group was the parent company that operated 3 major hospitals in the Miami area, including Miami General. I've actually been working in administration here for 3 years, I continued calmly. Learning the business from the ground up, you might say. I had no idea, he managed, clearly recalibrating his understanding of who exactly sat before him. Few people did. That was intentional. I opened the folder, revealing a document with the hospital logo. I believe this is the Residency Placement Committee's current recommendation list. I'd like to discuss some concerns I have about one of the candidates, Dr. Kevin Blackwood. By the time I left Dr. Winter's office, Kevin's carefully orchestrated future at Miami General had evaporated. No scene, no drama, just the quiet power of influence properly applied. My next stop was the office of Patricia Alvarez, one of Miami's most respected attorneys specializing in financial fraud. The pattern is clear, she noted, reviewing the documentation I'd compiled with Autumn and Bianca. This isn't just a moral failing, it's potentially criminal. He deliberately misrepresented his intentions to secure financial support from multiple women. I'm not interested in criminal charges, I clarified. That would be too public, too messy. I want restitution for Autumn and Bianca. And I want it handled quietly but completely. And for yourself? She asked. I smiled. I have other plans for my own restitution. While Patricia began preparing the legal groundwork, I turned my attention to Diana Blackwood. Kevin's mother operated a boutique real estate agency in Boston specializing in luxury properties, maintaining a satellite office in Miami to capture wealthy snowbirds looking for winter homes. Her business depended almost entirely on referrals from developers and property managers, precisely the network that formed the core of Mitchell Properties' influence. One phone call to my father was all it took. She humiliated you publicly, Arthur said grimly after I explained the situation. That's not something we forget. No dramatic moves, I cautioned. Nothing that could be traced back to us. Rachel, I've been handling delicate business situations since before you were born. By this time next month, Diana Blackwood will be wondering why her phone stopped ringing. Kevin's increasingly frantic messages continued throughout the week. At first demanding explanations, then offering apologies, eventually descending into thinly veiled threats about making me sorry if I'd damaged his reputation with Dr. Winters. I saved every communication without responding, adding them to Patricia's growing file. When my doorman called to inform me that Kevin was in the lobby demanding to see me, I finally broke my silence with a single text. Asterisk, you've confused me with someone who still cares what you have to say. That woman no longer exists. Asterisk. 3 months passed in a blur of careful, deliberate action. I accepted the position my father had long held open for me, financial director of the Mitchell Foundation, which happened to be the largest private donor to the Miami Medical Foundation. Autumn received a settlement for her financial losses plus damages, allowing her to clear the debt she'd accumulated supporting Kevin. Bianca's settlement funded the launch of her own pharmaceutical consulting firm. Diana Blackwood quietly closed her Miami office after her client list mysteriously evaporated. The Miami Medical Foundation's annual gala was held at the Ritz-Carlton on a perfect October evening. I arrived on my father's arm wearing a Valentino gown that cost more than Kevin's monthly resident salary would have been, had he secured the position he'd been counting on. When Dr. Winters introduced me to the assembled medical elite as Rachel Mitchell, our new foundation financial director and the visionary behind our expanded residency grant program, the whispers spread through the room like wildfire. And then I saw him, standing near the bar in a rented tuxedo, his expression stunned as the pieces finally clicked into place. Kevin had managed to secure a residency position at a small community hospital in North Miami, the only program that would accept him after his mysteriously withdrawn recommendations from Miami General. I held his gaze across the crowded ballroom, neither smiling nor frowning, simply acknowledging his presence with the cool assessment of someone evaluating an underperforming investment. In that moment, I watched understanding dawn on his face, the crushing realization that the woman he had discarded as just investment material now controlled not just his residency placement but his entire professional future in Miami's medical community. I raised my champagne glass slightly in his direction before turning away to greet the chief of cardiology, effectively dismissing Kevin from my attention. The soft gasp from Diana Blackwood, who stood nearby witnessing the exchange, was just audible enough to reach my ears. "She doesn't belong here," he had said. How wrong he had been. That's the end of Rachel's journey from deception to justice. If this story of sweet revenge touched you, please hit subscribe. It takes just a second and helps our channel grow. Drop a like if you cheered when Kevin realized who Rachel really was, and tell me in the comments, what was your favorite part? Was it when she discovered his journal, when she dropped her ring in his champagne, or when she reclaimed her power at the gala? I'd love to know your thoughts.